The best way to win a fight is to kiss the other person on the lips. Duh. Hi, welcome back. Today we are recapping A Court of Silver Flames, the 5th book in the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas, and this is Nesta's book. If this is your first video here, I feel I should do a little disclaimer before we really get into things. I know Nesta is like a controversial character. She's my girl. She's my girly. She's always been my girly. She is one of my favorites. Now, before you flee, my goal here is not to convince you to love Nesta. I don't feel called to do that. I don't think Nesta would feel called to do that. Like, she's controversial for a reason. If you were here for my Throne of Glass series, I worked for Kale. I worked hard to try to convince you to like this boy, to give him a chance. I was on his payroll. I worked PR. I do not work for Nesta. In fact, I would say, more than anything, I feel I am a Nesta. Like, I look at Nesta and I see so much of myself kind of like reflected back to me, like an Ouroboros mirror. The favorite encountered last book. Like, I fear if I looked in an Ouroboros mirror, I would see the worst of Nesta Archeron staring right back at me. And I think a lot of people feel that. I think I get a lot of TikToks about Nesta Archeron because TikTok knows I will click and read the comments every single time. And you can see the controversy in the comments where people like feel like they are Nesta, and then you see the people that feel like they've been hurt by Nesta. Those do appear to be the two groups. You either are a Nesta or you know a Nesta. And I'm not here to tell the people who've been hurt by Nesta that like they need to love Nesta Archeron, but I am going to invite them to give her a good shot, okay? We are going to be approaching Nesta Archeron in this book in particular, but honestly in general, with so much softness. We're going to turn our hearts to their softest settings, and we are going to approach her with gentleness and empathy and kindness in this recap. Not because she deserves it, because honestly Nesta is like often vicious and she is mean and she fights like a wounded animal, lashing out at people who have had nothing to do with hurting her. But because I think she needs it. And I think fiction is such a beautiful way for us to practice empathy in a way that has like no stakes. Like, if you are kind to Nesta and it winds up Nesta like turns out she's still annoying and mean and evil and you don't think her growth journey is good enough, then you can just like close the book and move on. Like, there are no stakes like there would be in real life, but I think it is so beautiful and helpful to have fiction as this way that we can like practice empathy and like understand what it is to be another person and be softer than we would feel comfortable and safe doing in our real lives. And so I would invite you to do that as we approach Nesta, because I think the worst that happens is you like still don't like Nesta at the end of the book. You still think she's deplorable. You still think she's the worst. And you still think that about the other Nestas in your life. Like, nothing has changed. And I think best case scenario, you're able to go into the world with like more compassion and empathy for people who maybe like see the world and approach the world in like a different way and like are filled with like a lot of like rage and like pain. Because I think that's what Nesta's made out of. She's made up of rage and pain. And those two things like are hard to distinguish for herself and for us. And also, like, no one hates Nesta Archeron more than Nesta Archeron hates Nesta Archeron. So, like, you're in good company at the very least. Oh, also, before we jump into it, I wanted to thank anyone who tagged me in their YouTube rap. I got tagged in a few of those over on Instagram, and I loved each and every one of them. They were, like, it was, like, so fun to see. I still very much feel like a fake YouTuber. I, like, don't know what that means, but, like, I feel like I'm fake. I'm like, hey, guys, you know that you're watching, like, a fake YouTuber. Like, I don't know. I'm just here talking about books in my realm. I feel like, honestly, a similar way about the books I've written. I've published 2 novels, and I also feel like a fake author. Like, I'm like, those books are fake. But it turns out, and, like, I have to remind myself again and again, because it doesn't feel true. But it turns out, oftentimes, all you need to do is to, like, try. There's, like, no permission slip from the universe that, like, shows up and is like, all right, you are now able to make videos, or you are now able to write things. Like, you just kind of have to do them. Like, you become a writer because you write stuff. You become a YouTuber because you film videos and you post them online. I don't know. I just like felt there was this like seeing my name on like other people's lists really made this feel realer than I think it normally does. It normally kind of feels like a fake little thing I do in my room. So I wanted to thank you if you tagged me in one of those, or even if you didn't, if you're here watching these videos, if you comment, if you like them, if you're subscribed. Now that I'm talking about gratitude, let's do some self-promo. Occasionally I have to come on and do self-promo. I think I talked about my Patreon a couple months back. Occasionally I like put it in a video, but I like wanted to do a full thing because now there's like stuff. Now there's like things that you can actually see. And I think last year I like fully talked about it. It was just like the idea of things. I am over on Patreon, and I've recently also added similar things to my channel members tab. Right now on Patreon, I am going through the Twilight series, and I am recapping those, which has been so fun. Twilight obviously was like my gateway drug into romantasy. I loved the series when I was in high school, and I have been rereading them, and it has been like a very different experience reading them like as a full adult person and not a like teen or even a college age child. And before that, I did a full recap of the entire From Blood and Ash series, except the most recent book. I haven't recapped that one. I haven't read it yet. Leading up to the release of that most recent book, I've recapped every single book from both the From Blood and Ash series and the spin-off. Those recaps, I will warn you, are like much more casual than what I do here. There are no visuals and they're substantially shorter, but there's like, I don't know, 20 hours of me talking about From Blood and Ash over on the Patreon. In addition to that, we also have a monthly book club in which we read a book together, and then every week I like post about the chapters that we're reading for the week. Right now we are reading Brimstone by Callie Hart. I'm in the middle of that book and having a good time with it. And I just do like a little like 30-minute little like audio podcast style update about like my thoughts on the chapters and kind of like where we're at so far. They are like essentially the same things, Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's just like personal preference. I was on Patreon first, so that has like a tiny bit more, but I'm slowly moving things over to YouTube as well, if that is your personal preference of platform. I really appreciate everyone who supports me on any of these. I mean, watching the videos is also great support, but like if you financially directly support me, I like immensely appreciate it. It allows me a little bit more time and flexibility to dedicate to making videos, which I really love doing and love to do like more often. Would love to get into a spot where I'm giving you a recap every single week. That's like the dream, the goal, and truly impossible with my current work schedule. Let's jump into it. Of course, we have to start with the dedication to this book before we like really jump into the recap, because I love the dedication, which is why I put on the title slide. Sarah dedicated A Court of Silver Flames to every Nesta out there. Climb the mountain. I love it. It is like so special and important to me. I love it so much. So today we'll be talking about part 1 of A Court of Silver Flames, Novice. The book opens with Cassian standing nervously outside of Nesta's apartment door. He'd cut down more enemies than he cared to tally, had stood knee-deep in gore on countless battlefields and kept swinging, had made choices that had cost him the lives of skilled warriors and had been a general, a grunt, and an assassin, and yet here he was, lowering his fist, balking. Nesta is living in this like kind of grungy apartment, even though Feyre has offered her townhouse. Feyre has moved into a new house that we will call the River House, because it is like a big manor on the river, and they've like moved fully into that house. At this point, we kind of saw the beginnings of that in A Court of Frost and Starlight, and now they fully moved in there. So the townhouse is just like sitting empty. They've offered it up to Nesta, but Nesta doesn't want to live there. She's like happy in her little grungy apartment. Cassian knocks on the door, and he's actually like hoping that she's not there. He's like, I don't actually really want to encounter her. And he's hoping that she'll be like drinking or something, although that like just means he'll have to track her down in town. But he knocks, and then he hears footsteps on the other side of the door. He listens as 4 locks unlock on the door, like this like girlie is locked down, and she yanks the door open. She looks terrible. He hasn't seen her since the end of summer party, which has been like a month ago approximately, I think, and she has just gotten like so gauntly thin. So I guess at this point we're like almost a year and a half post-war, I believe. And she has just like, Nesta has just struggled, and she is just like looking truly terrible. And Nesta says to him as she opens the door, what do you want? It's 7 o'clock in the morning. And she's wearing only like a man's shirt. And Cassian says, rough night. And Nesta tries to slam the door in his face, but Cassian like obviously just like tucks a boot in the way, so she can't close the door on him. And Cassian explains to her that Feyre wants to see her at the River House. Actually, he says, Feyre wants to see you at the house. And Nesta says, which one? She has 5. Does she have 5? We have the River House. She has the townhouse. She has the Moonstone Palace in Hewn City. She has the like cabin in the mountains. I don't know. What's her 5th house? Am I missing one? Probably. The Illyrian house? The house in Rhys's mom's house in Illyria? Is that what she's talking about? Cassian says, the new one, the River House. And Nesta says, why didn't my sister fetch me herself? We learned that they've like barely spoken since winter solstice. So like 9 months ago when A Court of Frost and Starlight happened. He was surprised to see her at the summer party, but Emerie had invited her. Although it seems like the two of them had some sort of big falling out at the party. No one really knows exactly what happened. But like Nesta had been the first one off of the boat when they docked, and like clearly hadn't spoken since. Cassian explains that Feyre's like really busy because she's being the high lady and stuff, which is why she didn't come down here herself, but he is supposed to bring Nesta to the river house at 9 a.m. And Cassian can hear that there's a man in Nesta's apartment, like trying to very like sneakily get dressed and sneak out the window. And Cassian's like, I'll be back in an hour to check on you and I'll bring you a tea. And Nesta says, don't bother, I'll be there on time. And Cassian says, no. I was asked to see you from door to door. Like, I'm to make sure you arrive. Do you want your tea with milk or with lemon? And Nesta just like slams the door in his face, and Cassian does head out to go get some breakfast, some food. Nesta doesn't even know the name of the man in her apartment, and he is like currently leaning out the window watching as Cassian like walks out on the street below. And Nesta is like, he's whatever, he's handsome enough. And he is like in awe of the fact that Cassian was just here. He didn't realize who Nesta was, or who, more importantly, who her sister was. And now he's like smelling a little like fear. Nesta's like, now he's afraid of me. Nesta thinks to herself, what would his fear smell like if he'd learned that she'd used him, slept with him to keep herself at bay, to settle that writhing darkness that had simmered inside of her from the moment she had emerged from the cauldron. It helped, not entirely, but it kept the power from boiling over, even if she could still feel it streaming through her blood, coiled tight in her bones. She's a witch. This comes up like kind of often in this book, and ever since Nesta goes into the cauldron, we again and again see Nesta like referenced as a witch. And I don't think we've really seen witches in this world, but we have seen witches in another worlds. And I love them. So I like hope. My like wish and hope and prayer is that one day Nesta will see some witches. The man tries to like start asking Nesta some like follow-up questions about like what Cassian is doing here. But Nesta just tells him to leave, and then she goes and takes a bath. She's able to take baths for the first time. Last time we spoke to Nesta in A Court of Wings and Ruin, Nesta was unable to take baths because they reminded her so much of going into the cauldron, and they were so traumatic for her. But she has worked her way up to now being able to bathe again, which is like great. There's no showers in Prithian, I do not think. So she's stuck with baths. And as she's sitting in the bath, she's thinking about her father. She's like traumatized by her father's death at the end of Wings and Ruin. The King of Hybern killed her father in front of her right after her father had kind of like returned with ships for his daughters. And Nesta thinks about her father's like last words to her quite often. She was alive, immortal, even though her father was not. No, her father was ashes in the wind, his existence marked only by a headstone on a hill outside the city, or so her sisters had told her. I loved you from the first moment I held you in my arms, her father had said to her in those last moments together. Don't you lay your filthy hands on my daughter. Those had been his final words, spat at the King of Hybern. Her father had squandered those final words on a worm of a king. Her father, the man who had never fought for his children, not until the end, when he had come to save them. To save the humans and the Fae, yes, but most of all his daughters. Her. A grand, stupid waste. Unholy dark power flowed through her, and it had not been enough to stop the King of Hybern from snapping his neck. She had hated her father, hated him deeply enough, and yet he had loved her. For some inexplicable reason, not enough to try to spare them from poverty or to keep them from starving, but somehow it had been enough for him to raise an army on the continent, to sail a ship named for her into battle. She had still hated her father in those last moments, and then his neck had cracked, his eyes not full of fear as he had died, but of that foolish love for her. That's what had lingered, the look in his eyes. The resentment in her heart as he died for her, it had festered, gnawing at her like the power she buried deep, running rampant through her head until no icy bath could numb it away. She could have saved him. She feels like kind of like a lot of what has happened to her and Feyre and Elain has been really her fault at the end of the day. And what happened to her father, obviously, as we just read, feels also very much like her fault. And some days she gets like so panicked over the thought of her father's death and everything that has happened to them that she can't help that the power rises up inside of her. When she went into the cauldron and became Fae, she also snatched some power. And so Nesta has kind of like turned to just like drinking and sleeping around and going to these bars at night. That like all Nesta does is go to these bars. She plays card games, she listens to live music, and she hooks up with random men, and that kind of like numbs her enough most of the time to like keep all of these bad feelings down. She's like, we like also find out that she's like taking care of herself in the bedroom department. She is like on some birth control, and then can regularly bring guys home with her. She like mostly avoids Feyre and Rhys. Rhys has offered her several jobs like within his court, but she's declined all of them because she feels like they were pity offerings, and she like didn't want just like a handout from Rhys. She knows that Rhys doesn't like her. And she's like, I don't want this man who doesn't like me to just give me a job because he's like sleeping with my sister. You know? Fair enough. She'd never told him that the reasons he hated her were the same reasons she lived here. Took cold baths some days, forgot to eat on others, couldn't stand the crack and snap of a fireplace, and drowned herself in wine and music and pleasure each night. Every damning thing Rhysand thought about her was true. And she'd known it long before he'd ever shadowed their doorstep. Yeah, you hate Nesta Archeron, probably not as much as Nesta Archeron hates herself. Like, she is well aware that everyone thinks she's, like, vindictive and mean and terrible. Like, she knows it. She, like, knows it's true. She's, like, still chilling in the bath when Cassian knocks again. She wants to ignore him, but she knows that he'll just barge into her apartment, so she gets herself dressed and answers the door. She unlocks those 4 locks that she had installed herself. She installed them immediately after moving in. She knows they, like, won't keep her safe, but there is just, like, there's such a level of, like, constant anxiety for Nesta that, like, this is just, like, a little something that she can do to, like, help keep that somewhat at bay. Cassian strolls in with a mug of tea, and he's assessing her apartment, and she's thinking about how, like, everyone is so obsessed with him and thinks he's, like, so cool, because he is. She's like, he is so cool. And she thinks about the terror she had felt when she had felt the cauldron's power coming and gonna kill Cassian, that moment in the war. She had saved him but hadn't managed to save 1,000 other Illyrians that the cauldron had killed a moment later, and she feels like guilt over that as well. Cassian says to her, ever think about hiring a cleaner? Nesta ignores him as she slides on a pair of shoes, and he comments on the fact that her sheets smell like multiple different men, and she does not appear to change them between men. And she says no one has complained. And then Cassian is like, your tea is getting cold and you should bring a scarf. It is brisk out. Nesta can tell something is wrong because Cassian's acting like a little weird, and she is nervous that he is bringing her to the house to let her know and to let everyone know, like, that they're going to have a meeting with Feyre and Rhys to let them know that they're entering another war, and that the thought of that is just, like, terrifying to her, and she's, like, very worried about the human queens because obviously we didn't fully deal with them in the last war. She follows Cassian outside where they're going to fly, locking those 4 locks behind her. They arrive at the river house, and it's gorgeous. It is this, like, massive estate. It is beautifully decorated with tons of, like, Illyrian made art, from, like, chandeliers that are made from, like, a glass artist in town to like pieces of hand done furniture. It manages to both be, like, massive and, like, just absolutely luxurious and still feel, like, cozy and like a home. There's paintings all over the house of Feyre's. Feyre is, like, painting now, like, quite regularly, and there are paintings everywhere of Feyre's of all of her friends and all of her family, but none of Nesta. There's not a single painting of Nesta in this house. This detail actually, like, cracks me. Like, this detail, like, hurts my feelings so badly. I don't know why. Like, I will think about this detail in my, like, everyday life. Like, I'll be minding my own business, you know, doing whatever, and then I'll be like, Feyre didn't have not a single painting of Nesta in her home. And I'll be like, not a single one. There also isn't any of their mother, but, like, I don't care. Their mother is, like, one dead. Also, like, a terrible person. So, like, that's fine. No Marmot Archeron paintings. But, like, not a single one. Like, Amren's in here. We're gonna have a painting of Amren in the house, but not of Nesta? I actually don't know if Amren's in there. I, like, might have made up that detail, but, like, I feel like Amren is in there somewhere. Like, I'm not saying, like, Nesta needs to have a giant portrait in the front hall, but, like, you couldn't have done, like, a little portrait of the 3 of you? Like, it does hurt my feelings. Like, it makes me want to cry. Here we kind of, like, we get, like, the first inklings. We spend a lot of time learning more about Nesta in Mama Archeron. We didn't hear much about her from Feyre's perspective because Feyre was fairly young when their mother died, but Nesta was their mother's favorite. Elain and Feyre were always, like, Papa Archeron's girlies, but Nesta was, like, her mother's prize. Cassian takes Nesta into the study where Amren, Feyre, and Rhys are waiting, and Nesta is thinking about how she ruined her relationship with Amren at the end of summer party, and how she, like, misses going to Amren's apartment and doing puzzles with Amren and, like, getting magic lessons. And Feyre says to her as she sees her sister come in, I heard you had quite the night. And Amren says, you look atrocious, though I bet it's hard to look good when you're out until the darkest hours of the night, drinking yourself stupid and sleeping with anything that comes your way. And then Nesta says, wasn't aware that my activities were under your jurisdiction. And Amren says, they are when you spend that much of our gold on wine. And Nesta says, okay, so I came all this way for a scolding. And Feyre's like, no, it's not a scolding, it's a discussion. We want to talk to you. And Nesta says, my life is not your concern or up for any sort of discussion. And then Rhys comes in and he says, sit down, you're going to stay and you're going to listen. And he's using his, like, High Lord voice, which has, like, a level of, like, magical sort of, like, compelling to it. Like, there is like a level of power even in his words, and Nesta does try to resist those. Rhys and Nesta are two sides of the same coin, to use Sarah's very own phrasing. They are the same in so many different respects, and because of that, they butt heads so ferociously. They butt heads in a way that cannot be understated. And they always have, and they always will, and that like makes sense to me. I think sometimes one of the critiques this book gets is that like Rhys feels like a different character in this book than he does in other books, and like to me, no, he doesn't. We're just getting like a very different perspective of him, and Nesta views him as this guy who's trying to like hold power over her, which is like never good. Like, Nesta does not like to be told what to do, and also that is her baby sister's husband. I'm sorry, like I feel like that's fine. She doesn't like her brother-in-law, and her brother-in-law is the boss of her. It's a tricky situation for Miss Archeron. And Rhys really like views Nesta as like one of the reasons that Feyre had such like a terrible childhood and like such a dangerous childhood, and he doesn't like her for that reason. And he also just like, again, they like really butt heads. There's like a power struggle between the two of them, and they just like are both these like kind of stubborn a-holes. They both are. And they're like fiercely protective of the people they love. But like there is like a cold, sharp aloofness that they hold with everyone else. And I think it actually like makes total sense that the way like Rhys is seen in this book through Nesta's eyes, which is badly. Nesta says to Rhys, you are not my high lord. You do not give me orders. And Rhys says, do you want to go head to head, Nesta Archeron? We've got plenty of space out there to brawl. He wants to fist fight her. Like, what the heck? And Nesta thinks to herself that she'd rather die than bow to him, obviously. And Feyre's like, literally stop. I think the, like, power struggle between Rhys and her sister literally drives Feyre bananas. I think she also doesn't understand it. Like, Feyre doesn't I don't think Feyre has the same level of, like, need for control over situations and the need for, like, power. And so, like, I don't think she totally gets the fact that these two are gonna hate each other forever. And it's one of my favorite things about them. The fact they don't like each other, and they're my two favorite characters in the series, is actually like really special and important to me. Feyre then turns to Nesta and is like, okay, look, we've got to make some changes. We've let things get too far. Clearly, things are going bad for you. Okay, you're not doing well. I should have helped you. She says she like says that. She like takes some fault for this. She's like, I should have helped you. I should not have just like let you be by yourself. I like thought that giving you space and time would help, but clearly it hasn't. So like I will take some of the blame for your current behavior, but I'm not going to just sit around and let you destroy yourself. Like, I wanted to give you time, but you're clearly moving in the wrong direction. She's like, we're done with that. We're like not going to fund it anymore. You're not going to live in that terrible apartment and just like go out and party every night. Like, we're done. And Nesta says, okay, well, where am I supposed to go then? Feyre looks to Cassian, and for once, Cassian wasn't grinning. You're coming with me, he said, to train. And then Feyre goes on to explain that they've decided that Nesta is going to live in the House of Wind, and she's going to train with Cassian in the Illyrian Mountains in the morning, and then she's going to work in the library in the afternoons. And Cassian is watching Nesta get like increasingly mad about this, and he realizes that he should have placed himself between Nesta and Feyre, like to protect his High Lady. Okay, Nesta's not going to hurt anyone. Calm down, everyone. Nesta has never pushed her sister down the stairs. Stop acting like she's going to. But also, Feyre is shielded, which is, like, a little weird. It's, like, Rhys says it's, like, part of her ongoing, like, training. She has, like, an impenetrable shield around her. Okay. Nesta, in response to the fact that Feyre has suggested she's moving, says, no, I'm not. I'm not going to move to the House of Wind, and I'm certainly not going to train at that miserable village with Cassian. And Emerie says, it's not up for negotiation. Your apartment is being packed as we speak. By the time you return, it will be empty. Your clothes are already being sent to the house, although I doubt they will be suitable for training at Windhaven. And Nesta says, you can't do this. I'm not a member of your court. And Emerie says, you seem to have no qualms about spending this court's money. During the war with Hybern, you accepted the position as our human emissary. You never resigned from the role. So formally, you are still an official member of this court. And then we kind of get Cassian recounting the night that was like the straw that broke the camel's back for Feyre and Rhys. They had gotten the bill from one of Nesta's nights out, and Rhys had just like sat there and read aloud this like outrageous bill at this bar while Feyre sat there and cried into her scrambled eggs. Okay, this line about Feyre crying into her scrambled eggs gets, like, brought up a lot. And I, like, totally don't get why people are, like, so, like, obsessed with it. Like, she's crying over breakfast. Her tears are falling into her scrambled eggs. I cry a lot, so, like, I'm sure I cried over breakfast. And I do love a scrambled egg. And I would cry into my scrambled eggs. Like, if you're leaned over, kind of like your head tucked because you're hearing all this bad news, your tears might fall on your scrambled eggs. This seems, like, quite reasonable to me. I don't know why people are upset about it. Whatever. Anyway, they had kind of decided at this meeting that they were going to have Amren act as, like, the person to actually, like, give out this, like, ultimatum to Nesta to hopefully preserve the family ties between Feyre and Nesta and Rhys. Because, like, obviously, if Rhys suggested it, Nesta's going to be like, bye. And Feyre wants to, like, maintain a good relationship with her sister. I don't know why they didn't have Cassian do it. Amren actually, like, really does annoy me in this book. Like, she is so, like, grating and terrible. And I just don't like her. And I mean, it's partially Nesta's fault. Like, if you're going to have one friend, as I said in the last book, I don't know why you'd pick it to be Amren. But, like, Amren, I feel like, doesn't make the best choices ever. She, like, does not care about, like, setting Nesta off in a way that, like, not that you should not have to walk on eggshells around Nesta, but, like, also, I don't know what I want from Amren, but it's not what she's doing. Anyway, Amren gives her two options. So she either moves into the House of Wind, trains with Cassian, then works in the library. She's, like, not a prisoner there, but also there's no way for her to leave. They again and again emphasize that, like, no, this is different than when Feyre got locked up in a house, okay? Because Nesta can leave. She just has to go down a flight of 10,000 stairs to get to the city. Yeah, so, like, actually, if you make it, like, incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult to leave somewhere, we would still consider that a prisoner. Again and again and again, we, like, need to have conversations around what it means to be a prisoner. And if it's not, like, easy for you to leave, that would also make you a prisoner. That's like if you put someone in Alcatraz and you said, you can go back to San Francisco. You just have to swim. You're not a prisoner here. Go. What do you mean? She's locked in the House of Wind. 10,000 steps. And we'll learn more about the steps. The steps of my beloved House of Wind. One of my favorite characters in this whole book is the house. And we'll learn more about it later. But, like, the 10,000 steps are, like, yeah, she's a prisoner in this house. They give her a second option as well, which is that she can just go back to the human lands. Which obviously isn't going to work. She would be, like, a prisoner in her own house there as well, because the human lands are very anti-fae. And so as a high fae girly, no one would allow her, like, honestly, it would be incredibly dangerous, and she would just be, like, trapped in her house because it would be the only place that she could be safe. So she is like, which prison do you want? You want to be in prison, like a nicer prison, or do you want to be in a less nice prison? And she's like, I guess I'll be in the nicer prison. And they're like, stop calling it a prison. It's like a vacation home that you're trapped in. And you don't get to pick. And then Nesta is like, Elain needs to be able to see me. And Feyre's like, Elain agreed to this whole thing. This was kind of like, Elain was like, great, think that's a great idea. She's currently the one packing your things in your apartment. They'll be waiting for you when you arrive. Elain knows how to contact you if she wants. If she wants to come visit you, someone will take her up there to visit you. And this is, like, particularly crushing, devastating for our Nesta girly, because, like, her and Elain were like a little duo. Like, so much of her human life and the beginnings of her fae life were spent trying to protect her sister. She, like, loves Elain so much and feels, like, so fiercely loyal and protective to her. The fact that, like, Elain chose Feyre in this moment makes Nesta feel so incredibly alone. Nesta turns to Cassian and says, I suppose this was your idea then. I don't know why she decides it was Cassian's idea. And Cassian says, it was. We're going to have a wonderful time together. He is protecting Feyre, even in this moment. And then Nesta is like, can I speak with you alone, Feyre? And Rhys agrees. They head out into the hall, clearly a sign that they, like, don't trust Nesta to go farther. Like, Rhys is like, I'm gonna be right out in the hallway. Guys, I forgot the time that Nesta physically assaulted Feyre. Like, is she sometimes mean? Did she not teach her sister how to read? Should she gone into the woods instead of Feyre? Yeah. She, like, did not push her down the stairs. And I know she has kind of, like, some volatile powers, but she has not used those to hurt anyone. They're overreacting. Then we're left with, like, Nesta and Feyre alone in the study. And Nesta is like, why do you suddenly care about this, Feyre? Feyre says, we have always cared. We just thought it was best to give you space. And Nesta says, what did Elain have to say about this? And Feyre says, this isn't about Elain. Last I checked, you barely saw her either. And Nesta is thinking about how hard it was to be around Elain after Elain had gotten kidnapped. During the war, the Cauldron had kidnapped Elain after Nesta had done that scrying. And Nesta feels really guilty over that as well. She remembers just, like, that terror of that moment of knowing Elain was gone and it was her fault. And she just, like, finds it difficult to be around Elain now. She just, like, cannot be around her without reliving that moment in which she found Elaine's tent empty. And Feyre continues, for what it's worth, I was hoping you'd turn yourself around. I wanted to give you the space to do it, since you seem to lash out at everyone who comes close enough, but you didn't even try. And that word sends her back to that conversation she'd had with Cassian on the solstice about how she doesn't try. Cassian had said then, go somewhere else. She had swallowed her response. I have nowhere to go. She is not at home anywhere. She kind of like talks about that, how like she's never really felt like she's had a home. Feyre says, all you have done is help yourself to our money. And Nesta says, your mate's money. Thank you so much for taking time out of your homemaking and shopping to remember me. Shots fired. She's like, Feyre, you may call yourself high lady, but I've seen you do no government work. Also, you are a sugar baby, and that is your sugar daddy in there, and don't pretend differently. This does hurt Feyre's feelings. Sorry, she's a gold digger. And the Feyre's like, I built a room in this house for you, and I asked you to help me decorate it. You told me to leave. And Nesta says, why would I ever want to stay in this house? She thinks to herself, where she could see precisely how happy they were, where none of them seemed remotely as decimated as she had been by the war. She'd come so close to being a part of it, of that circle, had held their hands as they stood together on that morning of the final battle, and believed they all might make it. Then she'd learned precisely how mercilessly it might be all ripped away, what the cost of hope and joy and love truly was. She never wanted to face it again, never wanted to endure what she'd felt in that forest clearing with the King of Hybern, chuckling, blood everywhere. Her power hadn't been enough to save them that day. She supposed she had been punishing it for failing her ever since, keeping it locked up tight inside of her. Why would I ever want to stay in this house? And Feyre says to her, because you're my sister. Cue me crying again. This book is like me crying on and off kind of like the whole time. We're not going to do a cry count like Kingdom of Ash because I don't want to. But like, just know that I'm like crying the whole time. Like I'm crying probably even when Nesta isn't. This book does hurt my feelings. It does. And then Feyre kind of like loses it because Nesta's being like a pill. And she starts talking to Nesta about how like embarrassing it is to watch her sister just like spend all of her money and like run around town and just be like a hoodlum, and like how her family like has to hear about it. And Nesta's like really pained by the fact that Feyre calls like the Rhysand's inner circle her family. She like feels like a rejection. It feels like a rejection of her and Elain, like her actual family, as if things had been so miserable that the Archeron family that Feyre had needed another one, had chosen her own. And Nesta says, so it's just about saving face. And Feyre says, it is about how it reflects upon me, upon Rhys, upon my court. When my damned sister spends our money on wine and gambling and does nothing to contribute to this city. If my sister cannot be controlled, then why should we have the right to rule over anyone else? Nesta says, I'm not something to be controlled by you. I won't go. And Feyre says, okay, then you'll have to learn to control yourself. You will go even if you have to be tied up and hauled there. Again, that is giving prisoner. Nesta says, you have no right to close up my apartment and to take my things. And Feyre says, what things? A few clothes and some rotten food? I'm having that entire building condemned. It will be torn down and rebuilt as a shelter for families still displaced by the war. What do you mean? Nesta had one apartment there. There are other families that live in that building. Was it just Nesta in the apartment? I don't think so. I think it was an apartment building. And Feyre's like, we're ripping it down. This seems like, you know, an affordable housing option in Valaris, and they're ripping it down. Kind of rude, Feyre. Then Nesta says to her sister, I never want to speak to you again. And Feyre says, that's fine. You can talk to Cassian and the priestesses instead. And Nesta says, I won't be your prisoner. And Feyre says, no, you can go whenever you wish. As Amren said, you are free to leave the house if you manage those 10,000 steps, but I am done paying for you to destroy yourself. And then Nesta asks to talk to Elain first, but Feyre says Elain will come to her when Elain is ready. Feyre's eyes gleamed. You don't think I know why you've pushed Elain away? Nesta didn't want to talk about it, about the fact that it had always been her and Elain, and somehow it had become Feyre and Elain instead. Elain had chosen Feyre and these people and left her behind. Amren had done the same. She had made it clear on the barge. She's like, I'm all alone. I have no home. I have no one. I have nothing. My sweet baby. Meanwhile, Cassian and Rhys are having tea in Rhysand's study, which is a multi-level room in the business wing of the house. So this house is big. When you have to start naming the wings different things, your house is giant. Your house, you live in a palace. I'm sorry, like a house with wings that you have to name. It's big. And in Rhysand's office, we're not told much about it except that he has a massive moving model of the stars and planets. Like he has what's it called? A planetarium. Not a planetarium. I guess it's not a planetarium. I guess it's just like a model of the planets. Does that have a name? If you know, tell me. I also think that's interesting because of other things that I like can't talk about, but like it's interesting that he has some interest in other planets and stars and space and things. Okay, great. A lot of Feyre's paintings are on the walls as well. And Rhys is like chatting with Cassian to make sure he's like ready to deal with Miss Nesta. And Cassian is like, I've gotten young warriors in line before. And Rhys is like, okay, sure. Like obviously Nesta's going to be trickier than all of them. Cassian has spent like the last several months working particularly with the Illyrians to make sure that they're kind of like cared for in the aftermath of the war, and also that they are recognizing like Rhysand's authority. There has been like some dissension, and so he's just been like out there working with the Illyrians. Cassian, the troublemaker that we had heard about in Frost of Starlight, had been slain in the blood rite, so everything's been pretty peaceful since then. Rhys implies that he wants Cassian to take on even more responsibility now that the Illyrian situation seems like well handled. So since he had dealt with that situation so well, he gets even more responsibility. This is why you shouldn't do too good of a job at your actual job, because they will start just giving you more work. You want to do like 80%. You want to be a B student at work. They talk a little bit about Nesta's powers and how no one has seen it since the war, and there's a possibility that with the cauldrons breaking that the power is left. But Rhys kind of just thinks that it's just sleeping, and he warns Cassian to be on his guard. And then Rhys starts talking about like some of the responsibilities that he wants Cassian to deal with is to take over kind of some of the work with the human queens. Azriel is already spread like pretty thin, and so he's going to need Cassian to pick up some of the slack. And Cassian's a little confused because he's not a spy or a courtier. And Rhys says, "Are you scared?" And Cassian says, "So I'm to deal with the queens as well as train Nesta." Like, he's just like, this just seems like a lot on my plate. And Rhys is like, yeah. He's like, "What is Feyre doing?" And Rhys is like, "She's teaching art class once a week. Please leave my wife out of this. I understand I called her a high lady, but she is busy." And Cassian says, "We're in for a long few months then." And Rhys says, "You sound like you're afraid of her." And Cassian says, "I am." And I do think Nesta would be delighted to hear that. In the foyer of the River House, Cassian comes out of the study with Rhys to find Nesta in the front hall. "Did you keep those fighting leathers from the war? You'll need them tomorrow." And Feyre says, "I made sure Elain packed them for her." And Mor appears because she's the one winnowing them up to the house because Feyre is busy. Okay, again, she has to teach one painting class a week. She's booked and busy. And I've spared you from the combo about like what Feyre and Rhys will be up to. Oh, I do remember actually. There is like talk of Feyre and Rhys getting up to spicy times. And like, I don't know why that needs to be included. That's not my business. We learn that Mor has just returned from Valhalla, and Cassian hasn't seen her yet, so he gives her a big hug, welcomes her back, but he can tell that something is off with Mor, but Mor is just like, "I'll talk to you about it later." And then Mor says to Cassian, "Congratulations on your promotion, Cassian, the courtier. I never thought I'd see the day." And then Nesta looks over at him like a little bit surprised and a bit worried about the announcement. And Cassian like grins at her and says, "Still a bastard born. Don't worry." And Feyre says to Nesta, "We'll talk soon." And then Mor winnows them up into the sky out of the House of Wind, and Cassian has to fly them down. They land in Nesta's, immediately trying to get the hecky out of there. Like, not out of House of Wind, but out of, like, Cassian's arms. She spent weeks here last year during that terrible period before being turned fae, begging Elain to demonstrate any sign of wanting to live. She'd barely slept for fear of Elain walking off this veranda or leaning too far out of one of the countless windows or simply throwing herself down those 10,000 stairs. Sick! I'm so glad she's trapped here. This seems like a perfect place for her healing. It is. I love House of Wind, but a little traumatic. Nesta has not spoken since she left the study with Feyre because she's like a little bit scared of herself and what she might say, because I don't think it'll be nice. Cassian lets her know that she'll be in her old rooms and Cassian will be in the room above hers. And Nesta's like, "Why would I need to know where you're sleeping?" And Cassian says, "In case you have a bad dream and need someone to read you a story, maybe one of those smutty books you like so much." And Nesta's thinking about how she's never felt at home in any of the places that she's lived, but she's happy to be near the private library where she first kind of started reading those romance books. She devoured dozens of them during those weeks she'd first been here, desperate for any lifeline to keep her from falling apart, from bellowing at what had been done to her body, her life, to Elain. Elain who would not eat or speak or do anything at all. Elain who had somehow become the adjusted one. But after that war, she can't imagine a future for herself. She just like is too traumatized, honestly, by the war to plan for a future. And so she becomes the one that is just like stuck. Cassian goes on to explain that Azriel is also staying in the house, but he's like pretty busy, will mostly keep to himself. Nesta like thinks in her mind what she could say to Cassian that would best hurt him, like implying that Rhys would bankroll his life, that he didn't deserve to be here, that there's this like instinct in her that just like rises with like the perfectly selected words to like slice and wound someone. And she thinks she'd always had the gift, if it could be called that. Yet it wasn't a curse, not entirely. It had served her well. Like there's something useful about like this ability to like speak and articulate herself in such a like cutting way that like sometimes she had needed that, but like it was also like something that she turned on people that she loved a lot, you know? And that's not great. Cassian can tell that she's like cooking something. And he says, Let's hear it, Ness. And Nesta says, don't call me that. And Cassian says, you need to eat something. And Nesta says, I don't want to. I'm not hungry. She hasn't been hungry since the battle. She essentially eats just like enough to essentially not die. And Cassian comments that she'll need to eat before training. And Nesta once again informs him that she has no plans to go to training. Cassian says, okay, well, if you don't go to training, it's back to the human lands for you. And Nesta knows that she can't go back there. And she just is like, I'm tired. And Cassian says, fine, rest today. Mora Reese will come by tomorrow after breakfast to winnow you to Windhaven. We'll do 2 hours of training, and then you'll be brought back here to meet with Clotho. Nesta heads up to her bedroom, which is like so high up that it is often like in the clouds. And she closes the curtains because she doesn't want to look out on the city on this like bright autumn day. And she just like climbs into her bed. Later that evening, Cassian and Mora are at a cafe together. I guess it's the afternoon because Mora's basking in the sun. Cassian thinks she had never stopped appreciating the sunshine, even 500 years after leaving that veritable prison she called home, and the monsters who had claimed her as kin, his friend, his sister, honestly still savored every moment in the sun, as if the first 17 years of her life spent in the darkness of the hewn city still lurked around her like Azrael's shadows. As they're sitting in the cafe, Cassian has like a string of admirers who either just like greet him or just like stare at him as he like walks up to Mor, and Mor kind of teases him about it because when he was young, Cassian had like really loved it until Amarantha had taken Reese, and then he had felt just like guilt and disappointment every time someone came out to him. And like he like really is still like weighed down quite heavily by the time that Reese spent with Amarantha and kind of like that helplessness and guilt that he had felt during that time. Mor asks about how Nesta and how she's settling in, and Cassian explains that she's napping. He's like she went there, she went to sleep. And Mor says we'd be better off throwing Nesta into the Court of Nightmares. She'd thrive there. And Cassian's like, yeah, I think that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid her like turning into just a monster. Mor says, it pains you seeing her like this. Cassian says, all of it pains me. It pains me that Nesta has become this. It pains me that she and Feyre are always at each other's throats. It pains me that Feyre hurts over it and that I know Nesta does too. It pains me that I don't want to talk about it. And then Cassian switches the topic to Valhalla and how Mor's trip has gone. She tells him that they do not want to sign the new treaty because the human queens are still up to something. They're like, we need to know what the human queens are doing before we agree to sign this treaty. Seems like Valhalla, Montserrat, and Rask and some of the other Fae territories are potentially interested in another war in kind of the aftermaths of this last one in order to gain some new territory. Mor's just taking a couple days off, then she's going to head back to Valhalla. But Cassian needs to look into the human queenies in the meantime and find out what they're up to. Cassian's going to speak to Vasa because she knows the human queens quite well because she was one of them before she was turned into that firebird situation and sold to that sorcerer lord. And Cassian's like, why can't Lucian do it? And Mor says, Lucian can't be entirely trusted anymore. He's gotten too close to Jurian and Vasa. They're his friends. Even if he means well, his reports will be skewed in their favor. And so Cassian needs to go directly talk to Vasa as soon as possible. And Cassian's like, I miss you, Mor. You know, we'd let you know if Kira ever does decide to come here. He still hasn't visited Velaris. There were like plans for him to visit in the spring, but his trip has been delayed indefinitely. And we find out that Eris has the one who has bought her some time, but it doesn't matter to her. Meanwhile, Nesta wakes up in the dark. Initially, she's like really disoriented. She doesn't know where she is. She slept all day. The stars are out when she wakes up, and she thinks about her mother, who used to tell her, my Nesta, Elain will be wed for love and beauty, but you, my cunning little queen, you shall be wed for conquest. Appalled Nesta's mom would be if she knew how close Nesta had come to marrying the woodcutter's son, Tomas, and we learn a little bit more about what happened there. The weak-willed woodcutter's son, who had sat idly by while his father beat his mother, who had put his hands on her when she had called things off between them, who had attempted to take what hadn't been offered. Sometimes she still had nightmares about him, bruising him, and the coppery tang of blood in her mouth. Tomas better count his days. I'm coming for him. My Nesta, her mother had always called her, even on her deathbed, so wasted and pale from typhus. My little queen. Nesta had once delighted in the title, had done her best to fulfill its promise, indulging in that dazzling life that had melted away as soon as the debtors had come in, and all of her so-called friends had revealed themselves to be nothing more than envious cowards wearing smiling masks. Not one of them had offered to help save the Archeron family from poverty. They had thrown all of them, mere children and a crumbling man, to the wolves. So Nesta had become like a wolf, armed herself with invisible teeth and claws, and learned to strike faster, deeper, more lethally. Had relished it, but when the time came to put away the wolf, she had found it had devoured her too. Cassian wakes up. He's in his little room. He wakes up and he hears a door shutting, and so he grabs his knives, but no threat emerges through the wards. And he thinks back to a time when Hybern's men had breached the wards in the library, but the noise in the hallway had just been like Azrael being a little bit loud to let Cass know he had gotten home. And then Rhys pops into his brain, uses his mental telly to ask him why he's still awake. Sorry, that's creepy. That's creepy. Your boss is in your brain? I mean, like, why are you still awake? Ew. Cassian says, why are you snooping at me at this hour? And Rhys says, I wanted to make sure all was well. It's not your fault that you were already up. And Cassian lets him know that Nesta has been sleeping since they arrived. And Rhys seems like a little perplexed by this since they arrived at the house at like 11 a.m. But Cassian tells him like to leave it, just like not bed in, let things like work themselves out. And Rhys wants an update after her first lesson. The next morning they're at breakfast and Nesta is not eating despite the fact that Cassian is like really urging her to eat because like they're going to go train and she like needs food in her system. But Nesta doesn't want the porridge and eggs. She says that looks gross. Nesta is feeling like very vulnerable in her leathers because they show off her legs and she is used to wearing like full skirts. Nesta wants toast. Nesta wants toast for breakfast, but Cassian gives her a little nutrition lesson and tells her she needs protein. He won't even let her have sugar for her porridge. This kind of seems a little negative. Like, girl's half starved. Let her have a little sugar on her porridge if she wants. He's like, it's not good for your metabolism. Okay, I think we have bigger fish to fry right now, Cassian. They like leave and Cassian is distracted by Nesta's butt and her pants. He hasn't slept with anyone in 2 years since he met Nesta Artron. But he knows the last thing she needs is Cassian panting after her, and he also knows that she is not interested in him, and she like has made that very clear to him on Solstice. Moore arrives, winnows them to Windhaven, just drops them off real quick and then leaves. It's freezing cold when they arrive at Windhaven. Everyone in camp turns to stare at them when they land, and then Lord Devlin comes up and says, what's her business here? And Nesta goes, witchcraft. Cassian says, I will remind you, Devlin, that Nesta Artron is our High Lady's sister and will be treated with respect. She will be training. And then Devlin says that any weapon that she touches needs to be like buried afterwards, and she won't be allowed to touch any of the weapons if she's on her cycle. And Cassian's like, we won't be abiding by these outdated superstitions. The Illyrians are rough people. Cassian takes her over to the training ring, and Nesta like plops herself right down onto the ground. And Cassian says, hey, bestie, what are you doing? And Nesta says, I told you I'm not training. And Cassian says, get up. And he thinks to himself, get up. She'd sobbed that day before the King of Hybern. Get up. That's what she said to Cassian. And Nesta says, I'm attending training, but I will not lift a finger. All the Illyrians are staring at her now. And Cassian's like, get the hell up. Devlin and his group had returned, attracted by their argument, and gathered around the edge of the circle. Cassian's hazel eyes remained fixed on hers, though. A slight pleading note flickered in them. Get up, a small voice whispered in her head. Her bones, don't humiliate him like this. Don't give those a-holes the satisfaction of seeing him made a fool. But her body refused to move. She'd drawn a line, and to yield to him, to anyone, something like disgust filled his face, disappointment, anger, good. Even as something crumpled inside of her. She couldn't stop the relief. Cassian turned away from her, drawing the sword sheath down his back, and without another word, without a glance, he began his morning exercises. Let him hate her. It was better that way. Nesta just watches as Cassian goes through his training exercises, and she thinks to herself, she'd never been able to look away from him. From the moment they'd met, she'd developed a keen awareness of his presence in any space, any room. She hadn't been able to stop it, to block it out, no matter how much she suggested otherwise. Go, he had begged her as he had laid dying. I can't, she wept. I can't. She didn't know where that person she'd been in that moment had gone. Couldn't find her way back to her. Moore arrives a little early, comes up to Nesta and says, hard at work, I see. He's pretty, isn't he? Why aren't you out there? Moore's like, a lot of comments. 1, you're not working. 2, Cassian, gorgy. 3, wait, why aren't you out there? And Nesta says, I'm taking a break. But Moore looks at Nesta and it's very obvious that Nesta has not sweated a drop. She's just been chilling. She does not look like someone who's been training. And Moore says, my vote would have been to dump you right back in the human lands, And Nesta says, I know. Good thing being Feyre's sister has its advantages. And Moore says, I knew plenty of people like you once. Her hand drifted to her abdomen. You never deserve the benefit of the doubt that good people like him give you. As I said, I don't think Nesta deserves kindness all the time, but I think she might need it anyway. Ugh. Then Cassian comes over and comments that Moore is early, and Moore is like, hey, I just wanted to see how things were coming along. It seems like today got off to a slow start. Cassian says, yeah, you could say that. And then Moore winnows them back to the House of Wind. That afternoon, Nesta is working in the library, and she's mostly thinking about how much she hates Moore. Fair enough. She hasn't talked to Cassian since they got back. She'd just gone to take a bath to warm herself up because she was freezing. And then when she finished, there was a note instructing her to be in the library at 1 p.m. She went to the library not because Rhys had told her she had to, but because she's bored. She has nothing better to do at the house, okay? She meets Clotho, whose hands have been mangled and then healed, so the damage would be impossible to undo. And Clotho also is mute. I don't know if we know why. but she doesn't speak. She writes all of her notes. All of Clotho's dialogue is in notes. Nesta thinks about the men who had put her and her sister into that cauldron and how she'd been unable to save Elain. She like feels a similar level of kind of like disfiguration in her body that Clotho had, this lack of like ownership over her own body that was taken away from her by these men. Clotho passes her a note and tells her that she'll be shelving on level 3 until 6 p.m., so the next 5 hours. I do love shelving books in the library. That is actually like so calming to me. It is just like enough of like a physical task and like one that you like have to kind of like mentally be present to do, that like there is something like meditative about it. I do think shelving books in the library would be kind of healing. Good thing for your healing process. Clotho is like watching her, and Nesta is filled with this voice that says to her, I am worthless. I am nothing. I hate everyone. I hate everything that I am. And I am so tired. I am tired of wanting to be anywhere but in my own head. But she forces herself to like numb those words, and she gets to work. And Nesta like finds she quite enjoys the work as well. Her mind kind of like quiets herself as she's like surrounded by these shelves and these like priestesses. She knows no one else can come down here without their permission, so she like feels fairly safe, and she's also like kind of grateful that they've allowed her for some reason to come down here. When she finishes, she goes to Clotho, and Clotho passes her a note that essentially tells her to like see her tomorrow and wear less beautiful clothing so she doesn't ruin them with all of the dust that is in the library. And Clotho writes, "It was nice to meet you, Nesta. Feyre speaks highly of you." And Nesta writes back, or Nesta says back, she doesn't write back. Clotho can hear. "No one likes a liar, priestess." That night, Cassian doesn't show up to dinner, and Nesta tries to get wine from the house, but the house has been strictly instructed. The house has been strictly instructed not to give her any alcohol. Boo, tomato. And so Nesta decides she'll go get herself wine. Meanwhile, Cassian winnows to the Band of Exiles. Oh my gosh, I forgot that they named themselves this. So Jurian, Vasa, and Lucien have named themselves the Band of Exiles, we found out in the last book, which is hilarious to me and makes me want to bully them a little bit. Anyway, she gets winnowed to the house by Moore, and he's supposed to go talk to Vasa. Moore just like drops him off, and Cassian is in a really bad mood after the morning with Nesta because he feels like she embarrassed him in front of the Illyrians on purpose. So he just like dropped her off and then like pieced out and like went and sat on a cliff by the ocean for a while to calm down. Stopped by the river house afterwards to like give an update to Feyre and Rhysand, and Feyre was annoyed that Nesta didn't participate, and Rhys seemed amused. Amren said, because Amren was also there, "Let her dig her own grave, boy, then offer her a hand." Cassian says, "I thought that's what this past year had been." And Amren says, "Keep reaching out your hand." Okay, this is her advice to Cassian, but Amren has not reached out her hand one single time. Not a singular time. Anyway, he goes into this house they're staying in the human lands. Lucien greets him and also lets him know that Eris is there. Cassian hates Eris, maybe more than the Morgan hates him on her. Because Cassian hates Eris on Moore's behalf. And like sometimes that is how it goes. You like find out about someone who did your friend wrong, and you like hate them more than the person who was actually done wrong. You know, because there's no confusion of feelings there. There's no time for forgiveness. You're just like, I hate your guts. I wish you were dead. And she's thinking about how one day he's going to murder Eris, and he doesn't really seem to care that Rhys is now like buddies with Eris. Cassian knows he can't talk about the human queens in front of Eris, even though supposedly they're allies. But he needs to like come up with some pretend reason that he's here for like a friendly visit. And Cassian is having like a hard time with this. He like does not feel prepared to have these like Courtier politics. He is not great at this like interpersonal kind of like formality of being like a political social engagement. He bows to Vasa, "Your Majesty," and Jurian says, "It goes to her head when you call her that." This says, "I am a queen, you know." And Jurian said, "Last I heard, your kingdom was no longer yours. Are you still a queen?" And Vasa says, "Did you come with news or orders?" to Cassian. And Cassian says to Lucien, "We give you orders as our emissary, but when you are with your friends, we only give suggestions. How is the spring court?" This is what he decides to like cover with. And then immediately Cassian's like, "I don't know why I asked that." Like Lucien gives those updates directly to Rhys. So like, and Lucian's like, "It's fine." And Cassian is like really floundering. And then he turns to Eris and he's like, "Why are you here?" And Eris explains that they lost a group of several dozen of their Autumn Court soldiers on his lands a few days back without a trace. None of them could winnow. So like, unclear where they could have gotten off to. So he's checking to see if the humans might know something. And Cassian says, "You believe a group of humans could kill your soldiers? They can't be that skilled." And Jurian's like, "Hey, I'm a human. Rude." Cassian's like, sorry. He's like stepping on his own toes. Bless his sweetheart. And Eris says, "I think plenty of parties are interested in triggering another war, and this would be the start of it. Though perhaps your court did it. I wouldn't put it past Rhysand to winnow my soldiers away and plant some mysterious sense to throw us off." Cassian's like, "No, but we're allies." And Eris is like, sure. And then Drane explains that the humans are not interested in starting trouble. Like, no interest in having another war. And Vasa continues and says there have been rumors that things are brewing on the continent, and that the queens might be interested in starting some trouble, though it's unclear why that would have caused them to go after Eris's soldiers. That seems kind of random. And also it would have been easier to take Tamlin's soldiers, because Tamlin is a hot mess express. And Cassian thinks about how Rhys had not killed Tamlin, even though Cassian would have if put in the same situation. And he's like, also, if I ever find out who hurt Nesta, he'd peel their skin off of them, but Nesta won't give him a name. Rowan will be proud. That is the appropriate response. If someone hurts your girly, you do have to peel their skin off. Rules are rules. Vasa says that if it's any of the human queens, it would have been Brylin, the one who had been made into an old crone by the cauldron. And Cassian tenses up thinking about that woman and her anger at Nesta particularly. And he knows that if that queen went after Nesta, he'd kill her. No questions asked. And Lucien has to be like, hey dude, calm down. Cassian's like, you really think Brylin would do something like this? Be that blatant? Someone has to be trying to fool us into going after her. And Lucien says, also, how would she even get here and vanish that quickly? Crossing the sea would take weeks. She'd need to winnow to pull that off. And Dragon's like, the queens can winnow. We saw it during the war. And Voss is like, no, it's only when there's most of us together, and it's different than Fae powers. And Eris says, I've heard Brylin is the only queen left in their palace. The other three have scattered, so she wouldn't have been able to winnow unless someone else was fueling her magic. Who could aid Brylin so she'd be bold enough to do such thing? Look to Courtier. And Courtier is the sorcerer that had captured Vasa, the queen we see here, who is a firebird at night. Cassian says, the sorcerer who imprisoned you is named Courtier. Is he the bone carver's brother? The bone carver mentioned a brother to me once. A true immortal, a death lord. That was his name. And Boss is like, yes, Courtier was the bone carver's older brother. Rest in peace, bone carver. I miss you. He was my favorite little monster from the series. I know people are big fans of the serial, but I've said it before. The bone carver was always my guy. I loved him. Vasa goes on to explain, he's imprisoned at this lake, and everything he does is to free himself. They call him Courtier the Deathless, for he has no death awaiting him. So if he teamed up with Brylin, he thought he would team up with Brylin if he thought it might lead to his freedom. I fear what might happen if he ever gets free of the lake. If he sees this world on the cusp of disaster and knows he could strike hard and make himself its master, once he tried to do so long ago. And then Lucien is confirms that for now he's still at the lake, and then they head on out. Eris and Cassian leave at the same time, and Eris says to Cassian, you make a terrible courtier. What do you know? And Cassian says, as little as you. And then Eris sends more and asks why she didn't come inside as well, and Cassian is like, she didn't know you were here. Cassian assumes she probably did know that Eris was there, probably could tell, but that's not her issue to deal with. Cassian will fly out of here instead of waiting for her to winnow him back to make sure that she doesn't have to directly engage with Eris in any way. And Eris continues, whatever it is you are doing, whatever it is you are looking into, I want in, because my father has already pledged his forces to Brylin and the war he wishes to incite. He caught wind of her ambitions and went to our palace a month ago to meet with her. I stayed here, but I sent my best soldiers with him. He goes on to explain that those were the guys who wound up going missing. When they'd returned from the trip with Baron, they were weird and kind of aloof, and then they vanished soon after. And there was also the strange scent that had been around these gifts that Brylin had sent earlier. So definitely seems connected to Brylin. And Cassian's like, you knew this the whole time? And Eris says, you didn't think I'd just spill all that information, did you? I needed Vasa to confirm that Brylin could do something like that. Cassian says, why would you and Brylin ally with your father only to abduct your soldiers? And Eris is like, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out. And Cassian's like, we could kill Baron to solve this problem. But Eris is like, no, because if I'd made any moves, Baron would immediately know it was me, because I'm the only one who knows this. So we have to keep this on the DL in order to keep my role as kind of a spy of sorts safe. Eris mentions that his father might be moved to give up a certain Archeron sister to solidify the alliance between him and Brylin. And Cassian knows that in that moment that he really messed up, kind of nodding to the fact that he cares about Nesta, because now this is information that Eris has access to, and he will use it. And then Cassian says, what's stopping me from just killing you now? I don't know, Cassian, that doesn't really seem helpful in this situation. I truly don't know what problems that would solve. And Eris is like, if you kill me now, then for sure there'll be a war. We have to be allies. And then Eris winnows away, saying to Cassian, stick to fighting battles, General. Leave the ruling to those capable of playing games. We go back to Miss Nesta, and Nesta has headed for the stairs. The house won't give her wine, then she will take the stairs. Still snarling, Nesta yanked open the heavy oak door and peered down the steep, narrow spiral stairs, each a foot high, 10,000 steps around and around and around. Only an occasional slitted window to offer a breath of air and a glimpse of progress. 10,000 steps between her and the city, and then a half-mile walk at least from the bottom of the mountain to the nearest tavern, and awaiting blessed oblivion. 10,000 steps. Now I present to you the PowerPoint presentation I made when I first read this book in 2021. I did not yet have a YouTube channel. This PowerPoint presentation was purely for myself. I read this book and immediately was like, wow, 10,000 stairs seems like a lot of stairs. And then I looked up some tall things. I was like, okay, the tallest thing that I've ever been on that has stairs that I can think of is the Eiffel Tower. And there are 674 steps to the second floor of the Eiffel Tower, which is the piece kind of in the middle before where the A part of the Eiffel Tower comes together, and it takes 30 minutes on average for an unrandom tourist to climb those stairs. The very top of the Eiffel Tower is 1,667 steps, which would, at that same rate, take about an hour and 15 minutes to climb. The House of Wind is 10,000 steps, so if we were going at that same casual rate, Nesta would be going, because we assume she's not in shape, it would take her just under 7.5 hours to walk up the stairs. She's going down them, but so, and I was like, okay, what's the longest staircase in the world? The longest staircase in the world is the Nessian Railway, which is 11,674 steps. So an Eiffel Tower more than the House of Wind. And they have a race every year where people will run up the Nessian Railway. And the world record for climbing it is just over an hour of climbing. So we did it. Okay, we solved it. Yeah, we figured this out. And I think this is in the Swiss Alps, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, there was a little detail in that scene I just read to you about these stairs that make it near impossible, because Nesta comments the fact that this is a spiral staircase where the steps are bigger than usual. They're a foot high. So that's I don't know, a foot high. Most steps I think are 6 to 8 inches. That's a pretty average step. If they're a foot high and it's a spiral, the House of Wind must sit exactly 10,000 feet above the town. The Nessian Railway only gains 5,400 feet of elevation. Also, the staircase is a spiral, so we're talking about almost a completely vertical climb, which means that Nesta and the House of Wind are sitting on an almost 2-mile high vertical cliff face. I made a TikTok about this ages ago, and people tried to fight me to say, that's not how stairs work, but unfortunately it is. If every step is a foot, you go up a foot every time you step up. If there's 2 steps, you're 2 feet high. If there are 10,000 steps, you're 10,000 feet high. And also a spiral staircase has to be vertical. You can't have a slanted spiral staircase. When I originally pictured the House of Wind, I think I pictured a staircase that went up the mountains and kind of went back and forth and traveled horizontally as well as vertically. This is truly straight up and down, 10,000 feet vertical, which is why spiral staircases are most commonly found in towers. I've also heard people say oh, Nesta's just being dramatic. They're not actually a foot high, but I actually think it makes a lot of sense for them to be a foot high. We know that the Fae are more fit and have more stamina just naturally in their bodies than people. So I think it makes sense to have a foot high. Also, I know that Valaris is based on a city in the Swiss Alps, but it doesn't actually match the description of the book. Okay, it doesn't. Because the vertical cliff face, and then there might be a little bit, and then the town. She's a half mile, so there is a little bit after she gets down all those steps. But that doesn't prevent there to be a 10,000 foot vertical climb between her and the base of the staircase. So then I started looking into some tall vertical cliff faces, because I was that feels crazy. And I understand that things can be 10,000 feet high. I live in Colorado. We have a lot of mountains that are 14ers, which are 14,000 feet high. So that part is not impossible, but we're already at a mile high. And also, it takes a while to get into the mountains. It's not you're at this part and then you're suddenly in the mountain. We're looking at a vertical climb. And so I looked up the tallest vertical climbs. The biggest vertical cliff face is Mount Thor, which is 4,100 vertical feet up, and that's in Canada. And then the one I'm most familiar with is El Capitan. At the time I made this PowerPoint, I had recently watched Free Solo with Alex Honnold, in which Alex Honnold had climbed El Cap without any ropes. And so this was particularly relevant to me. And this is what I decided to really focus in on. In fact, I also asked this question in my original PowerPoint. Would Nesta Archeron beat Alex Honnold in a fight? And obviously I do think she would win. And obviously I also think she would fight him on sight. I think she would see him, kind of catch his vibe, and she wouldn't like it. And she would have to beat him up. And I think that's fair. Oh, here's a picture of El Cap next to something so you can get kind of a sense of its scale. So we have the Eiffel Tower next to it, and the Space Needle, the Empire State Building, and another building. I don't know what that is. So here's a portrait of how high the House of Wind would need to be. That's 3 El Capitans stacked on top of each other would be how tall the House of Wind would need to be. Okay? I love this. This is magical to me. Like, this is so special and I love it. People will like point this out as a plot hole, and it's not a plot hole to me. It's just like mad. I love it. I love how ridiculously tall this place is. Like, if Nesta were to fall off the House of Wind, that veranda on the top of the House of Wind, it would take her 25 seconds to hit the ground. That's such a long time to be falling. It's just like really important to me. I made this PowerPoint presentation ages ago. It's just like a personal special interest is the House of Wind's height. And I'm so glad I finally got to share it with you. Actually, I've already made a video about this if you're like really digging back in the archives, but I'm going to share it again. And if there's an opportunity for me to share it a third time, I shall. Anyway, back to Nesta. Nesta has like, I'm a fake girly. I can do this now. She's headed down the stairs. She starts to get winded at step 70 and her knees start shaking and she's like struggling to keep her balance. And she makes it down like 100 steps before her knees almost give out. She almost falls, but she decides to keep going a little bit further. And as she's walking, she's thinking about her father's final words to her. I loved you from the first moment I held you in my arms. Please, she'd begged the King of Hybern. Please. He'd snapped her father's neck anyway. But her legs are shaking so badly she decides to turn around and head back up. And then when she reaches the top, she's like crawling and very, very, very sweaty. I want to talk about this for a second. I know people love to argue about whether it's silly that she finds it like so difficult to go down the stairs and whether that would be like harder than going up. I don't think at any point she says going down is harder than going up. Like going up is hard. She's like crawling by the time she gets to the top. And I think cardio-wise, like, going down is obviously substantially easier than going up. But one, these are huge-ass steps. So, like, it's going to be hard on, like, her knees and muscles. And also, when she's going down, if she slips at all, like, her legs give out, she's tumbling down those stairs, which is, like, quite dangerous. And if she's going up and falls, she just, like, catches herself. And I do also think she doesn't want to get stuck in the middle of the stairs. So she like has to kind of recognize her limits and then go back up. And I just think in general, like going up is less scary than going down. Also just like in general, like as much as I love talking about the House of the Height of Wind and how silly and goofy it is that it is 10,000 feet tall, I find the conversation about Nesta going down the flight of stairs and like the like giggly conversation around it to be like a little bit insufferable. Like love the House of Wind conversation, hate the stair hate. Like, I just, like, can't stand it. Like, it bothers me because it, like, sort of makes sense. And also, I think, like, to the story, it is important that you, like, buy into this part. I don't know. I just, like, find that, like, the dialogue around going down the stairs versus going up the stairs to be a little grating. And I just don't think Nesta at any point says it's easier to go up than down. I just think she has to go down first. And so that's when she needs to make her decision about whether she's going to go up or not. And I do think it's scarier to go down than up. She comes down the stairs. Cassian's waiting for her. He had flown back, and he had updated Rhys mentally the moment he could, and Rhys kind of just tells him to keep an eye on Eris. He'd gone to dinner at the river house and then kind of like further discuss things with Rhys and Asriel and Feyre. When he gets back to the House of Wind, he smelled Nesta on the stairs, so he like waited for her to emerge. He's just like standing against the other wall, like leaning there. And Cassian says to her, or Nesta crawls out and says, whoever designed those stairs was a monster. And Cassian says, would you believe that Rhys, Asriel, and I had to climb up and down them as punishment when we were boys? And Nesta says, why? Cassian says, because we were young and stupid and tested boundaries with a high lord who didn't understand practical jokes regarding nudity. And he tells the story about how he had gotten so dizzy going down the stairs that he had puked. And then they were so sweaty and tired and stinky that they like puked again on the way back up as they smelled the puke. And Cassian asks what step she made it to. And when Nesta says she only made it to step 111, Cassian calls her pathetic. And he can tell that she can't like step up, so he like helps her to her feet. And then he says to her, if you get tired of being weak as a mewling kitten, then come to training and actually participate. Nesta is so sore the next morning, it takes her twice as long to actually make it to breakfast. Asriel comes to breakfast as well the next morning, and Cassian is like, good morning, Nesta, and he thinks it's funny that she's sore. And Nesta says, good morning, Cassian, and then she turns to Az. I haven't seen you in a while. And Az says, likewise, how's training? And Nesta says, training is fantastic, absolutely riveting. And Asriel says, I hope you're not giving my brother a hard time. And Nesta says, is that a threat, Shadowsinger? And Asriel says, I don't need to resort to threats. And Nesta says, neither do I. I want to train with him instead, pointing out Asriel. Cassian says, I think you'll find Asriel even less forgiving than I am. And Nesta says, with that pretty face, I have a hard time believing it. And Cassian says, you want to train with Az? Go ahead, though I doubt you'll survive a lesson with him when you can't manage to walk down 100 stairs without being so sore the next morning that you are unable to get out of your chair. And she stands up and has to hold back the pain, the yelp of pain she wants to at standing. Cassian says, doesn't count when you use your hands to do most of the work. And Nesta says, I bet that isn't what you've been telling yourself at night. Cassian says, is that what those smutty books teach you, that it's only at night? And Azriel's giggling to himself because everyone loves a flirty little banter moment between Cassian and Nesta. And Nesta says, sounds like you have a lot of time on your hands, Cassian. Nesta goes to finish getting ready, and Azriel says to Cassian, you are in trouble. And Cassian says, I know. Cassian is not sure how the taunting had just very quickly ended with flirting at the breakfast table, but knows Azriel would have smelled the change in his scent. And Azriel says, you two need a chaperone up here. And Cassian says, I thought you were the chaperone. And Azriel says, I'm not sure that I'm enough. And Cassian says, good luck today, as is leaving today to go begin spying on Briarlyn. And Azriel says, good luck to you too. And then they head to Windhaven. Back at the training ring, Nesta has once again refused to actually enter the training ring. He doesn't tell Nesta anything about what happened with Eris. And he does go up to her as she finds a little spot to plop on a rock, and he says, so we're back to this. You'd stop being so cold if you got up and move. If you want to sit on that rock and freeze for the next 2 hours, go ahead. And Nesta says, fine. And Cassian starts warming up, and then he reminds himself what Emerie had said to him. Keep reaching out your hand. An hour later, he looks back over at Nesta, and her lips have gone blue because she's so cold. So he winds up sending her inside to Rhys's mother's house so she doesn't freeze. She doesn't move at first, but then there's this big gust of wind, and she decides that being inside sounds better than being outside. The house is already warm with a fire, and Rhys must have kind of woken it up for them. And Cassian walks into the house, and it's so familiar to him because it was the first home he had ever had with Rhys. Every corner, every scratch has a memory of him and his brothers growing up together. And Cassian says, since you are so good at sitting, why don't you make yourself comfortable? And Nesta just staring at the crackling fire. And Cassian says, what are you looking at? And she flinches as the fire pops, because as we learned in Frost and Starlight, the fire reminds her of her father's neck breaking every time it pops. So, she's got some PTSD there. Nesta, looks really pale and, frightened, and Cassian, not loving that vibe, says, there are some shops in the village. If you don't feel like sitting in here, you could visit them. And then he leaves. Nesta does decide to make her way to the village. She heads to one of the shops in town and runs into a woman working at the counter. And this is Emerie. We met her in Frost and Starlight. Nesta asks her for if there's something warmer she can wear. And Emerie says, the warriors are all such proud fools that they never complain about the leathers being cold. They claim they keep them perfectly warm. And Nesta says, they are decently warm, but the cold still hits me. And Emerie says, I don't sell fighting gear, but I could potentially get fleece line leathers made. How often do you train? And Nesta says, I don't train. I'm just watching. And she's a little embarrassed by that. That's embarrassing to say. And Emerie says, were you brought here against your will? And Nesta says, it's part of my duties to the Night Court. And Nesta notices that Emerie's wings have these massive scars on them. And Emerie catches Nesta staring and explains that her wings were clipped. And Nesta knows about the practice because Feyre had explained that it happened, or it almost happened, to Rhys's mother. And Nesta says to her, I'm sorry. And Emerie says, it's of no consequence now. The shop keeps me busy enough that some days I forget that I could ever fly in the first place. And Nesta asks if a healer could repair them. And Emerie explains that it's too complicated. And short of the High Lord of Dawn, no one could fix her wings. And you know what? I bet our girlies from the Tor Sesame could fix them. Ugh, I miss the Throne of Glass girls. Anyway, Emerie offers to order the warmer leathers for Nesta, but kind of warns her it'll take a few weeks. And Nesta goes, how much will it cost? She's a little worried about the cost because she has actually no money. So I actually don't know how much it would cost that Nesta would be cool with, because I don't think she has any money at all. Emerie could be it's going to cost $3, and Nesta would have to be that's out of my budget. Her budget is a rock that she found outside on the ground. She has no money. Emerie says, I can send the bill to Valaris for you since you work for the High Lord. And Nesta goes, actually, I don't need warmer clothes. And Emerie was like, I thought Rhysand paid well. And Nesta says, I'm cut off. And Emerie goes, why? And Nesta says, I don't know you well enough to tell you that. Why did you tell her you were cut off? You could have been I can't bill my brother-in-law. Emerie goes, all right, I can still make inquiries, get a price for you. If you're cold out there, you shouldn't suffer no matter what the High Lord may think. And Nesta says, I think he'd rather Cassian threw me off the edge of that cliff over there. Emerie introduces herself then, and Nesta does as well. And as Nesta introduces herself, Emerie says, I know who you are. You killed that High King of Hybern. And Nesta's like, yeah. And Emerie's like, good. And then Nesta says thank you and heads back onto the street where everyone is staring at her. Nesta thinks to herself. She wanted to say to them, you are right to hide your children from me. She wanted to say, I am the monster you fear. We're back. It's a new day. I'm wearing the same sweater for continuity. Nesta goes back to the library that afternoon, and she's assigned to the exact same task as the day before, just shelving books. Cassian had dropped her back off at the house without saying much, and then he pieced out with Mor. And again, she's thinking about Mor and how she's jealous of Mor and her friendship with Cassian, and just she does not like Mor And I think that's fair. More, like, very clearly doesn't like her either. So the feeling is obviously quite mutual. When she returns to the house has lunch waiting for her, but she doesn't eat and head straight to the library. This time she's down on level 5. So the library goes into like the heart of the mountain. The House of Wind architectural situation is confusing to me. I wish there was diagrams. I think the like main house is on the very tippity top of the mountain, and then the library is like inside of the mountain. And I don't think the library has any windows. At some point, Nesta is talking to some of the priestesses, and they say they have like small windows in their dorms, and so they must be on kind of like the cliff face of the mountain. But I think the stairs would be like substantially less if we started from the base of the library rather than from the House of Wind. We would like lose like multiple levels. We would lose like, I guess not that many. You're still only losing like 100 stairs. Also, does the House of Wind have like a separate entrance, or do you have to go through the house? I like truly just don't understand really how everything works, and I would love to see some pictures. I would love to see a diagram. Anyway, she's down on level 5, and she's like trying to talk to herself because she's a little freaked out. Last time she was down this far in the library, they were hanging out down there with Bryaxis, who was that monster creature. But Bryaxis hasn't come back from the war. Bryaxis got set free to go do war things and just has taken the real long way home. It's been like 1.5 years since the war finished, and we still haven't found Bryaxis. I don't really think we're looking. I guess she's not stirring up trouble. And Clotho is like, don't worry, like, Bryaxis has never harmed any of us. I think she saw pity on us, saw our nightmares come true before we came here, but I can reassign you to a higher level, like, if it freaks you out. And Nesta's like, no, I'll manage. I'll be totally fine down here. An hour later, she's taking a little break from shelving, and the bean soup reappears. And she's like, I said, house, I'm not hungry. And then the spoon appears in the bowl. The house is, like, very insistent that she eat a little snack. And Nesta says, this is absolutely none of your business. And then one of the priestesses pops her head over to see who Nesta is talking to. And Nesta looks back, but the soup is gone. The house is gaslighting Nesta at this point. And Nesta's like, sorry, I wasn't talking to anyone. And Gwyn says, are you finished for today? And Nesta says, I was just taking a break. And Gwyn says, you've literally only been working for an hour. Why did you need a break? And Nesta's like, whoa, didn't realize anyone was timing me. Calm down. And then Gwyn gives her a whole stack of books to reshelves, and Nesta's like, you are literally not the boss of me, you can't give me books to restack. And Gwyn's like, pretty sure you're just here to work. Like, I don't remember anyone saying anything about you only being able to work for Clotho. Gwyn introduces herself as Gwyneth Bardura. I don't know how to say her name. But everyone just calls her Gwyn. And Gwyn is like, okay, so are you going to shelve these, or do I need to take them somewhere else? And Nesta says, I'll do it. And she's thinking about how every woman down here has had something like horrific happen to them. Like, this is really a place for like survivors of violence of some capacity. And she's wondering what happened to Gwyn, even though she has like no visible scars. And Gwyn says, I don't need your pity. She can tell that's what Nesta's doing. And Nesta says, it wasn't pity. Because you know what? Nesta would also hate pity. And Gwyn says, I've been here for nearly 2 years, but I haven't become so disconnected from others that I can't tell when someone remembers why I'm here and alters their behavior. I don't need to be coddled, only spoken to like a person. And Nesta says, I doubt you will enjoy the way I speak to most people. And Gwyn says, try me. And Nesta says, get out of my sight. And Gwyn smiles and says, you're good. And then Gwyn heads out, and Nesta starts shelving her books for her. At the end of the day, Nesta goes to Clotho and is like, same thing tomorrow. And Clotho says, are you not pleased by your work? And Nesta says, I would be if your acolytes didn't boss me around like a servant. Clotho says, Gwyneth mentioned that she had run into you earlier. She works for Meryl, my right hand, who is a fiercely demanding scholar. If Gwyneth's requests were abrupt, it was due to the pressing nature of the work she does. And Nesta was like, well, she just wanted me to shelve books, not find more for her. And Clotho's like, yes, other scholars need them, but I'm not in the business of explaining my acolyte's behavior. Like, if you had a problem with the way Gwyn spoke to you, you should have said something to her. And Nesta said, I did. She's a piece of work. And Clotho says, some might say the same about you. And Nesta says, yeah, some might. Clotho goes on to say, Gwyneth, like you, has her own history of bravery and survival. I would ask you to give her the benefit of the doubt. And Nesta says, okay. And Clotho says, good night, Nesta. Nesta heads upstairs, and instead of going straight to her room, she heads to the private library this time. And then Nesta asks the house for the soup. She says, I'm ready to eat now. And the house immediately provides it. The fire starts in the hearth, and Nesta immediately is like, no fire. We do not do fire. And the house also gives her some crusty bread. I don't know why that was noted, but I was like, it's important for me to know that the house believes she should have carbs. The house is not into Cassian. She's like, we are not going to just be feeding this girl boiled chicken and rice. She needs little treats, like some crusty bread with her soup. Nesta says thank you, and the lights seem to flicker out like a you're welcome in return. Nesta eats till she's like absolutely stuffed, and then the house offers her a piece of chocolate cake. The house is a girl's girl, okay? That's one thing you should know about the House of Wind. It might have the most confusing architecture of all time, but It's a girl's girl. Cassian comes in and sees the cake and asks Cassian, is this Cassian approved? And Cassian says, it is certainly isn't, but eat up. And Nesta says, what do you want? Cassian says, why are you eating in here? And why are you talking to yourself? Nesta then explains she was talking to the house and how it brought her food down even in the library. And she doesn't really understand how the house works. And Cassian is like, the house must like you, congratulations. And then he steals a bite of her cake, and when Nesta complains, he tells her to just take it from him. If she participated in training, she could fight him off. And Cassian says, your threats would be a hell of a lot more impressive if you could back them up. And Nesta looks at the fork she's using and thinks about stabbing him. And Cassian really notes her line of thought, and he says to her, I could teach you how to turn anything to a weapon, even a fork. Nesta bares her teeth, and Cassian leaves and gets up. Nesta goes to bed. She's reading a romance novel, and then she falls asleep. Cutie, my favorite bedtime routine, which is a romance novel before bed. When she wakes up, she's freezing. The house tries to start a fire for her, but she asks the fire she asks the house to put the fire out, and then she just shivers under her sheets until she warms up. And she dreams about the night Elain was taken by the cauldron, and then the dream kind of moves and transforms into the night her father was killed. She wakes up nauseous, her power thrumming under her skin from these nightmares, and she's hot and sweaty. She gets dressed and heads for the stairs because she really could use a drink to numb herself out. She goes to the stairs again, and again she hears her father's words echoing in her head as she pounds down the steps. I loved you from the first moments I held you in my arms. And she remembers what her experience in the cauldron had been like. And as that memory of the cauldron is coming up in her, power swells in her and her foot slips. And then she's tumbling down the stairs. She's trying to find something to hold on to, but she's in a smooth stone staircase. I don't actually think there is a iron thing, because then she could just grab it. So my depiction is inaccurate. I don't know if you guys knew this, but my depictions are often quite inaccurate. And she's trying to find something to hold on to. She finally grabs onto a stone, digs into a stone step above her, and sparks fly out of her fingers as her nails bite into the stone. And once she's kind of still, she feels the pain over her entire body. She's bleeding, and she looks down at her fingers, and they're literally embedded into the stone. She dug into the stone, and she moves her hands away, but the fingerprints kind of remain. There's these burnt divots from where she was holding onto the step. She's so freaked out that she jumps to her feet and immediately climbs up the stair. She's no. Nesta looks really rough the next morning because she did fall down a bunch of the stairs. Cassian doesn't comment on it until they get to the training ring, and he says to her, so who won the fight? The fall might have killed her if she was human. If she was human, the fall might have been enough to kill her, but as a fae, she's already healing. She's not feeling good today, but she's healing up. She won't have any permanent damage. Nesta goes, what fight? Cassian says, the one between you and the stairs. Nesta says, I don't know what you're talking about. And Cassian says, 3 a.m, you'll leave to go get drunk in town, and you're in such a rush to conquer the steps that you fall down a good 30 of them before you can stop yourself. And Nesta is appalled that he was watching her, and also a little annoyed that he didn't come help. She just fell down 30 steps and he didn't go hey girl, you okay? Nesta again invites her to train, and again Nesta is I am literally not training with you. There are so many men around the ring today watching Cassian trained, and they are clearly impressed by how he moves through the exercises. It's impressive, the control he has over his body. But when he talks to Nesta and she continually rejects him, the men can clearly become amused at this. They he goes from someone they admire to someone they are he can't even get the girl to do what he wants. And Nesta knows last year she would have ripped those men apart for insulting Cassian, but she just doesn't have it in her anymore. And Nesta just says to him, enjoy your exercises. And Cassian says to her, please. She'd never heard him say that word. It was a rope thrown between them. He'd met her halfway, let her win the power battle, admit defeat if she would just get off the rock. She told herself to get up, to take that outstretched hand, but she couldn't. Couldn't bring her body to rise. His hazel eyes were bright with bleeding in the morning sun, the wind dancing in his dark hair, like he was made for these mountains. Crafted from the wind and stone, he was so beautiful. Not in the way that Azriel and Rhys were beautiful, but in an uncut way, savage and unrelenting. The first time she'd seen Cassian, she couldn't take her eyes off of him. She'd felt like she'd spent her life surrounded by boys, and then a male, she supposed, had suddenly appeared, and all she wanted for so many months was to touch him, smell him, taste him, get close to that strength and throw everything she was against it, because she knew he'd never break, never falter, never balk. And then the light goes out in Cassian's eyes, and he lowers his hand, because Nesta is not taking his hand. And she is like, you know what, I deserve his disappointment, deserved his resentment and his disgust, even if it carved something vital from her. Tomorrow then, Cassian said. He doesn't speak to her for the rest of the day. That night, after she works in the library, she tries to go upstairs back to the private library in her level next to her room after her shift in the library, but the big library, the little library. But the door's locked and the house won't let her inside. The house says, go eat in the dining room. She hadn't eaten the sandwich the house had gotten her for lunch, and apparently it had made the house a little mad. The house is getting annoyed with Nesta. The house is like, girl, you got to get it together. And Nesta's like, please, all I want is a good hot meal and a good book. Please, please, please. And when the house doesn't, she has to relent and head to the dining room, where she catches Azriel and Cassian already mid-meal. They're eating dinner already. She doesn't speak. She just finds herself a seat, sits down, and starts, and the house makes a meal appear in front of her. And Cassian says, he's talking to Azriel, he just turns back to the conversation they were obviously already having. He says, how long will you be gone? And Azriel says, I'm not sure. Vasa was right. Vasa was right to suspect something deadly amiss. Things are dangerous enough over there that it would be wiser for me to keep my base here at the house and winnow back and forth. And Nesta is really curious about what they're talking about regarding the enchanted human queen, Vasa. And she's thinking about when she had met Vasa, because Vasa had traveled with her father to bring the human fleet to the war. And she thinks about how after the war, Vasa had talked about how just wonderful her father had been, and how when they traveled together, she had learned so much from him, and he was just such a wonderful man. And Nesta thinks to herself, her blood boiling to think that her father had found his courage for someone other than her and her sisters, that he had been the father she had needed, but for someone else. He had let their mother die in his refusal to send his merchant fleet hunting for a cure for her, had fallen into poverty and let them starve, but had decided to fight for this stranger, this nobody queen, peddling a sad tale of betrayal and loss. Nesta has so many complicated feelings around her father, and perhaps is the only one who properly gives Papa Archeron crap for not taking care of them when they were starving, because for most of Nesta's for most of their poverty, Nesta was a teen. I think we learned that Nesta, they lost all their money when Nesta was 14 or 15, and I think the book kind of kicks off with Feyre being 19 and Nesta would make Nesta 23. So yes, she had some years as a young adult, but a lot of it, especially those early years, her father should have been taking care of them, and he didn't. He failed to. And she just resents him a lot for that, and no one else really blames him. Rudely. So she has to blame him extra. Cassie and Az continue to vaguely talk about their plans and Rhys's thoughts on everything that's happening, and then Azriel turns to Nesta and asks what happened to her, since she's still all bruised and scratched up from her tumble down the stairs. And Nesta goes, nothing. And Cassian goes, she fell down some of the stairs. And Azriel goes, did someone push you? Cassian says, I told her earlier today if she bothered to train, she'd have at least bragging rights for her bruises. And Azriel goes, why aren't you training, Nesta? And Nesta says, I don't want to. And Az says, why not? Cassian says, stop, don't waste your breath, Az. There's nothing, she's just annoying. And Nesta says, I'm not training in that miserable village. And Cassian says, well, if you don't get off that rock by the end of the week, what happens next is out of your hands. You're going to get in trouble. We're probably going to send you away. And Nesta says, are you going to tattle to your precious High Lord? A big, tough warrior needs so powerful Rhysand to fight his battles? And Cassian says, don't talk about Rhysand with that tone. Nesta says, Rhys is an a-hole. He is an arrogant, preening a-hole. And Cassian says, that's BS, Nesta, and you know it. And Nesta says, I hate him. Good, Cassian says. He hates you too. Everyone hates you. Is that what you want? Because it happened. Congratulations. And those words are obviously devastating to Nesta. I know she talks a big game and she's the meanest lady alive, but obviously no one wants everyone in their life to hate them. That's a bummer. Does she care if Rhys hates her? No. I truly don't think she really does. But I do think she doesn't want her sisters to hate her. I don't think she wants Cassian to hate her. I don't think she wants randos to hate her. Rhys? Maybe that's okay. Nesta says, and I suppose now you're telling me that you're the only person who doesn't hate me and I'm supposed to feel something like gratitude and agree to train with you? Cassian says, no, now I tell you I'm done. And Nesta says, does that mean you're done panting after me as well? Because it will be a relief to finally know that you've taken the hint. Cassian says, you want to rip yourself apart? Go right ahead. Implode all you like. The training was supposed to help you, not punish you. I don't know why you don't get that. And Nesta says, I told you I am not training in that miserable village. And Cassian goes, fine. And then Cassian storms out. Nesta leaves soon after. She goes back to the library and starts shelving books. She goes to the big library then. Cassian is so done with Nesta. Clearly, Amren's advice to keep reaching out his hand isn't going to work because she's the worst. And he's sitting on the roof of House of Wind, and he's just like looking out on Velaris. And then Feyre winds up joining him up there, and she just came to check to see how things were going. And Feyre's still like wrapped in a shield, and Cassian asks why, and Feyre explains she's still working on like learning how to break free of the shield with all this danger afoot. Like Rhys is like happy to leave it on her. And they talk about the human queen drama. They're both like really kind of worried about it, but also like fairly confident they'll be able to handle it. And then Feyre asks about her sister. She goes, how bad is it? And Cassian goes, bad. Feyre says, is she going to the library? Cassian says she went back to the library tonight. She's still down there for all I know. Feyre says, did Nesta say why she won't train? And Cassian says, yeah, it's because she hates me. Feyre says, Cassian, Nesta does not hate you. Believe me. And Cassian says, she sure as hell acts like it. She doesn't hate you either, he said quietly. Feyre shrugged. For a while, I thought she didn't, but now I don't know. Feyre explains that they have always had like a really tense dynamic because Nesta was like Mama Archeron's favorite, and Mama Archeron had like no interest in Feyre. Nesta, for being like this like very well molded like societal expectation meaning manipulative and like the best of ways compliment girl, Feyre was like much the opposite, kind of like a wild child, a little bit more of like like a feral kid, wanted to be outside playing in the woods, which was like not Nesta's vibe. And Mom Archeron liked Elain, at least, not like personally, but she was like, Elain is like so pretty, it was like fun for their mom to dress her up, but like Nesta was like her project. Like Nesta and their mom were like so incredibly tight, and after their mom died, Nesta and Feyre were kind of constantly fighting. They had like taken that dynamic and kind of internalized it, and it turned into like real hostility between the two of them. Feyre says, that's my long way of saying that if Nesta hated you, I know what that looks like, and she doesn't hate you. Okay, Feyre, like Nesta Archeron has never hated you. As a girly who feels, like I understand Nesta fairly well and like loved book 1 Nesta never hated Feyre. I like truly don't think for like a single day Nesta hated Feyre. Okay, maybe one day, and that day might have been the day you shoved her in the house. She might have also been a little bit bitter when it was your boyfriend who turned her into Fae and Elain into Fae. So maybe there was a couple days, but like they were few and far between. Cassian says she might after what I said to her tonight. And Feyre says, Azriel filled me in. I don't know what to do, how to help her. And Cassian's like, maybe the library will be enough. And Feyre's like, no, she'll just hide in the library. She like needs something that she can like use as a tool to kind of like manage all of the rage that is bubbling inside of her. Cassian says, well, she said she's not training in that miserable village, so we're in an impasse. And then he realizes his mistake. He goes to kiss Feyre on the cheek, but the shield stops him. He's like, okay, I think I know one last thing I'm going to try to get through to Nesta. Then the next day, Cassian brings Nesta to the training ring located on the roof of the House of Wind. Nesta is still kind of like stuck on those words that Cassian had said to her yesterday, that idea that like everyone hates her. It's just been like a mantra, like repeating again and again in her head since he said them to her. And Cassian explains why they're up there. He says, there's no one to winnow us to Windhaven, so we'll just train here today, just you and me, Ness. And Cassian realizes last night that she said over and over again that she wouldn't train in that village. And he's like, obviously, I should have figured this out. Like, Nesta is too proud to be bad at something in front of an audience. Like, she's not going to want to make herself foolish in front of all these rando Illyrians who will, like, very willingly and happily make fun of her. This is definitely, like, a boy mistake. I feel like Mor should have caught on to this in, like, 1 second. Maybe she did. Mor does hate Nesta with a fiery rage in her heart. Cassian's trying to play it cool so he doesn't scare her off, but he's removed all the lounge chairs, and so there's nowhere for her to sit. On the roof, he's like, she's going to have to train with me. Girl, she'll sit on the floor if she wants to. Like, I don't know. Cassian's like, there's no chairs, so she's going to have to train. I think you underestimate her. But Cassian says to her, I'll make you a bargain. And Nesta knows the implications of a Fae bargain and kind of like the binding nature of them and how like it will mark her in ink. And Cassian says, if you do an hour of exercises right now, I'll owe you a favor for whatever you want. And Nesta says, that's a fool's bargain for you. I thought you were a general. Aren't you supposed to be good at negotiating? And Cassian says, for you, I have no strategies. And Cassian says there's no limits to what she can ask him, except she can't order him to kill himself. And Nesta agrees, obviously. She's like, kind of rude that you would think I would do that, honestly. And they shake on it, and Cassian gets the bargain tattoo, which is like an 8-pointed star on his back, and he knows that Nesta will have a matching one on her spine as well. He looks back and he catches Nesta admiring his naked torso because he took his shirt off to go see what his tattoo looked like. But he doesn't tease her because he like does not want to set anything off to like make her not train. And Nesta feels the bargain magic, and at the same time she can still hear Cassian's voice echoing in her head. Everyone hates you. She's looking at Cassian without his shirt on, and she's noticing all his scars and also that he's a gorgy man. And then Cassian gets started on her training. She is going to start with like breath work and like her foot placement. Nesta's kind of annoyed that she's not going to get to use the weapons. And she's like, when Feyre started, she got to jump right into weapons. And Cassian explains that one, they had a time crunch with Feyre. There was like a war like coming in a very different manner than right now, like impending. And also she came in with a lot more skills. Like Feyre was already someone who like was outside and like moving her body like quite regularly and had like much more like body awareness than Nesta. Like Nesta comes in and she has only like barely, she's like very, very, very thin. She's like no muscles and has just like been drinking herself into oblivion and like not moving for the past like 2 years. So, you know, a rougher place to be in. And Nesta's like, well, Feyre did teach me how to use a bow. And Cassian's like, you're not going to be able to use an Illyrian bow. You're like not strong enough yet for one of those. And Nesta's like, so I'm just going to spend an hour out here wiggling my toes. And Cassian's like, yeah. And Nesta spends like an hour barefoot doing these like silly little exercises that are mostly like working on balancing. But she does break a sweat as she's like actually like moving for the first time in a while. And her muscles are shaking by the time the hour is done. And then Cassian asks if she wants to do another hour. And Nesta's like, I don't think I can do any more of those exercises. Like I'm wiped from that. And then Cassian is like, that's okay. And he ends things off with like an hour of like breath work and like a stretching cool down. So he gets another hour out of her, even though it's not really like working out. And Cassian has Nesta laying down to do some stretching, and she's staring up at the sky above them. And she asks him, do you like flying? And Cassian says, I love it. It's freedom and joy and challenge. And Nesta goes, I met a female shop owner at Windhaven who had her wings clipped. Why do the Illyrians do that? Cassian says, to control their women. It's an old tradition. Reese and I tried to stamp it out by making it illegal, but change takes a while amongst the high fae. For stubborn asses like the Illyrians, it takes even longer. Emerie, I'm assuming that's who you met, since she's the only female shop owner, was one who slipped through the cracks. It was during Amarantha's reign, and a lot of stuff slipped through the cracks. Nesta can tell that Cassian feels really guilty about it and is like clearly like haunted by that time and how out of control Cassian was and how many bad things happened that Cassian like knew were wrong and that he had been unable to stop them. And then she asks him to start the cool down, and Cassian seems surprised that she seems so eager, and she explains that like the breathing makes her mind go quieter. So she finishes that up, then they go and he gets her some water and he's like, make sure you're drinking enough water today, like to like replenish and like get you all ready to go. And then Cassian says, you never told me what you wanted for that second hour of training. And she's already looking better and looking more alive than she had than ages. And Nesta says the second hour was on the house. Cassian says, very generous of you. Nesta says, I have to change before I go to the library. And as Nesta is leaving, Cassian says to her, I didn't mean what I said last night about everyone hating you. Nesta says, it's true. Cassian says, it's not. You're here because we don't hate you. I wanted you to know that we don't hate you, that I don't hate you. And Nesta says, and I have never hated you, Cassian. And then Cassian like watches her leave as like the words like punch him in the gut. Like, he needed to hear that too. Noon, Nesta's in the library. She's pretty sore from her morning workout as she's like shelving. Also, she's hungry. Because she's like kind of, honestly, it's not even that I think she like burned so many calories in her workout, though I'm sure that's part of it. But there is this sense where like Nesta has completely like detached from her body in this like post-war experience. And like this training is like regrounding her in herself. And like, I think she's like learning her own like hunger cues again. The piece that she'd gained in that training ring was gone now. Gwyn finds her again as she's shelving, and she's surprised to find Nesta shelving by hand. And she asks why like Nesta doesn't use her magic. And Nesta says, it's none of your concern. And Gwyn goes, okay, well, I have a stack of books for you to put back yet. And then she asks if Nesta's seen this like very specific volume of a book. And Nesta's like, no, probably someone else has it. And Gwyn's like, that is what I'm afraid of. I work for someone who is very demanding. And Nesta says, I take it you're not very fond of that person? And Gwyn says, honestly, I consider many of the females here to be my sisters. There are a few I would not consider nice. Oh, Gwyn goes on to like explain like, you know, like everyone is here because like we've had to endure violence. So like I hate to be like a hater and speak ill of others here, but like Meryl is the worst. She's so unpleasant. And then Gwyn explains that she had left the wrong volume of the book for Meryl. I think she left volume 8 and Meryl needed volume 7. And if Meryl finds that out, she's going to be so mad if it's not like in her stack of books today. And Nesta says, why does it matter? And Gwyn says, because I don't like to fail. I don't want to make mistakes. These females took me in, gave me shelter and healing and family. I could not stand to fail them. in anything, especially someone as demanding as Meryl, even when it seems trivial. And Nesta goes, have you left this mountain since you arrived? And Gwyn says, no. Once we come in, we do not leave unless it is time for us to depart, back to the world at large, though some of us remain forever. And then we learn, this is the part where we learn about the windows. They have windows in their dorms, pretty small windows that are glamored to not be visible from the outside, but that's the only sun they get. That seems really bad, and it's crazy that they don't have rooftop access. Get the girlies a garden on the roof. I know that's a training ring, and maybe we need all of that space. I don't know. There's a whole ass mountain. Can we build them a balcony where they can have a garden? I do think these girlies need sunshine. It's crazy to me they don't have sun. And it reminds me of Bryaxis. Bryaxis, that creature, one of her requests, sorry, for misgendering the monster. One of Bryaxis's requests, or I think the big one that Bryaxis wanted in order to participate in the war, was to get a window. And get these girlies a window in the library. They want a skylight. Get them on ASAP. I think they need sunlight. I don't think this is good for them. I think they're going to get really depressed if they don't get some vitamin D. They're going to look as pale as me. I do feel like the camera is making me look paler than usual today. Nesta's thinking about what it would be like to be locked up in this house forever, and then she asks the house to find her the missing book that Gwyn was looking for. And it thumps right onto her cart. A moment later, the house is happy to oblige, and Nesta asks one of the other priestesses where Meryl's office is. Nesta heads up to Meryl's office, sneakily brings in the correct book, and when she walks in, Meryl's like, where's Gwyneth? And Nesta says, who's that? A girl's girl to her core. And Meryl is confused to see Nesta, and Nesta pretends she was instructed to deliver these books to Rosalind, and Meryl's like, I'm not Rosalind. And Meryl's like, never disturb me again. And then when she turns away, Nesta swaps the incorrect volume for the correct one and then leaves her office. Nesta goes and finds Gwyn afterwards, and she's darting around the tables looking for the missing books, and she's singing to herself. Gwyn is always singing to herself. It's the sweetest. I love Gwyn so much. Oh my gosh. I feel like let's just pause for a moment and talk about how much I love this book. And one of my favorite parts of this book is the female friendship that forms at its core. Nesta and Gwyn do become quite close friends throughout the course of the story. And I feel like one of the things that is really lacking in a lot of romantasy books is this female friendship aspect. I talked about it in the early, all the Favors books. She needs a friend. Oh my gosh, Girly Nest desperately needs a friend. I'm reading Brimstone right now by Callie Hart, and I just read a huge chunk, and there was not a girl in sight. Our main girls, besides Sarah, our main girl, our protagonist, boys everywhere, and not a girly to befriend. And I'm just so grateful for these girlies being friends. I love Gwyn. I think it is she's just the sweetest and the loveliest, and she just sings to herself, and one of the cutest patootiest. Anyway, Nesta passes Gwyn the incorrect volume that she had taken from Meryl's office, and she says, this was shelved improperly, so I swapped it with the correct book. And Gwyn goes, thank you, you've just saved me from a terrible tongue lashing. And Nesta goes, what's Meryl researching anyway? And Gwyn explains that Meryl researches all sorts of things. When she first came here, she was researching the possibility of overlapping worlds, but now she's working on the history of the Valkyries, which is a group of female warriors from another territory. They were all types of fae trained from children, and then we learn that there were 3 stages of their training: novice, blade, and finally Valkyrie. But now they're all gone. The last of them wiped out in a war. The big war that we always hear about 500 years ago. They're the history of the Valkyrie have mostly been passed along in oral tradition. There's only mentions of them in records. There's no work that is focused on their role and their presence, hence why Meryl is working on it. And Gwyn is thank you so much for finding that book for me. I should get back to Meryl. I am in your debt. Nesta is exhausted that night when she gets to her bedroom. She eats the food the house has left out for her, then she climbs into a bath with her sore muscles, and then immediately climbs into bed. And that night she sleeps without a single dream. Cassian is waiting for Nesta up on the roof in the training ring. She hasn't been at breakfast or dinner, but he checked on her last night and found her passed out in bed. He debated waking her and insisting she eat, but the house had stepped in. A tray had appeared beside her doorway, full of empty plates, as if the house was showing him precisely how much she'd eaten, as if the house was proud of what it had gotten her to eat. I love the house so much. Nesta does eventually show up, and she's just moving slow this morning because she's pretty sore. She works out with him for her 2 hours, and then he helps her stretch everything out and explains that stretching is really important to make sure she doesn't get quite so sore. Nesta asks how long this will make her sore, and Cassian says, honestly, you'll always kind of get sore sometimes. And he says, after a big battle, sometimes I need a full week to recover. And he comments that Nesta is pretty nimble on her feet. Despite the fact that she has no strength to speak of, she is actually fairly had fairly aware of her body and is able to like move nimbly. I guess we'll just use this word. And she explains that she took dancing lessons when she was little. And Cassian is surprised. And Nesta goes, "We weren't always poor. Until I was 14, my father was as rich as a king. They called him the Prince of Merchants." And Cassian says, and you were his princess? And Nesta says, "No, Elain was his princess. Even Feyre was more his princess than I ever was." And Cassian says, "And you were?" Nesta says, "I was my mother's creature." It's giving Frankenstein. I feel like Frankenstein's really having a moment right now. I love the choice of like creature here, that she is not, like, she doesn't see herself as like her mother's like protege. It's her mother's like creature. Like, there's something like monstrous about the way Nesta describes herself in this moment. And Cassian asks, "What was she like?" And Nesta says, "The worst version of me." But Nesta's not really ready to talk about her mommy issues with Cassian. And instead she switches the topic to ask what happened in Ch.8. And Cassian goes still, but he tells her about the Hybern attack and how when Hybern had been looking for the cauldron's feet to like put it back together again, they had gone to Ch.8 and they had slaughtered and assaulted most of the priestesses there. And Cassian says, "You met one of them in the library. I'd heard more had brought one in, as had gotten there first and killed any of the Hybern soldiers that were left. I don't know what became of the other survivors, but I'm glad one is safe here with people who understand and wish to help." And then Nesta rises, telling Cassian that she's less sore now, and he's like, "You need to sit down and stretch." Okay, like, this is important. You got to do it every day. Cassian has got work this afternoon. Him and Rhys are headed to the spring court, which they just use the spring court now as like a conference room. They're like, "Tamlin is being annoying. Let's go to the spring court if we need to talk with anyone." So they head to the spring court. Going to the spring court is particularly miserable for Cassian because he has really bad allergies from pollen. And so he's like constantly like sneezing, itchy the whole time he's in the spring court. They're there to meet up with Eris, and they wanted like somewhere, like they didn't want to meet in either court. Eris suggests their next move should be eliminating the human queens instead of just like waiting around and gathering more information. And Cassian's like, "Well, if we kill those queens, we're going to have an even bigger mess on our hands. They will immediately start a war, most likely." And Rhys says, "Only if we're sloppy." And Cassian's like, "You're kidding." And Rhys goes, "Half kidding. Tempting as it might be to take the easy way out, I agree with my brother. It's a simple solution to our current problems and to thwarting your father, but it would create a conflict far greater than any we're anticipating. Why does your father want to start a war so badly?" And Eris goes, "Why does anyone want to start a war? The borders of this new world have not been set in stone yet." And Cassian goes, "Baron doesn't have the military strength to control the Autumn Court and a territory on the continent." And Eris says, "Who said anything about the continent?" And Rhys says, "The war might be so destructive that there might be courts left vacant at the end of it, bare for the taking." And Eris is being very like drama and like poetically sneaky about it, but essentially it is like, rumor has it Tamlin is staying in his beast form and letting all of his court fall apart. Like, that might be a court that is up for the taking. And Cassian is like, "Okay, so what? Tamlin might deserve it." And Eris is like, "You've been trying to bring him back for a while now, but he isn't getting any better, is he? I can delay my father for a bit, but only a couple months. In the meantime, they need to figure out like what to do about this human queen situation." And Rhys is like, "You've turned into quite the little traitor." And Eris says, "I told you years ago what I wanted, High Lord." And Cassian goes, "Why?" And Eris says, "For the same reason I left Morgan untouched at the border." And Cassian says, "You left her there to suffer and to die." And Eris says, "Did I? Perhaps you should ask Morgan whether she thinks that is true. I think she finally knows the answer. Tell me when the shadow singer returns." And then Eris leaves, and Rhys looks really distracted, and Cassian asks about it, but Rhys ignores the question and then winnows them home. Nesta hadn't spoken to anyone during her work in the library that day. She had hoped to see Gwyn again, but Gwyn had been busy and hadn't seen her. Her brain is just like very chaotic today. It's like going and going and going, which is why after her time in the library, she heads to the stairs. She walks past her fingerprints where they are burnt into one of the steps. And this time she makes it to 150 steps before her legs almost give out. And she doesn't want to fall down the stairs, so she starts to climb it back up. Because obviously, falling down the stairs would be worse. I think that's why the downhill is like so scary and why she always has to turn around. Because she doesn't want to tumble down the stairs. Also, again, the steps are bad. They're big. And it's going to hurt her knees. When she gets back to her room, there's a smutty romance novel waiting for her and dinner. And the house starts to run her a bath. And Nesta starts bathing and she says to the house, "I think you might be my only friend." The next day, Nesta's back in the library and she's on one of the lower levels and she starts to get like spooked. It's like spooky ooky down there. And the darkness feels alive even though Bryaxis is gone. There was night, and then there was the darkness of extinguishing a candle, and then there was this. Not only the true absence of light, but of a womb. The womb from which all life had come and would return. Neither good nor evil, only dark, dark, dark. It sounds like the darkness is calling her name, and like it's beckoning her towards it, and she doesn't love that vibe. Gwyn appears and is like, "What are you doing?" And Nesta turns back towards the darkness. It's not like moving anymore, but Nesta's kind of flustered, and Gwyn asks what she saw, and then explains Gwyn hasn't personally seen anything, a lot of the other priestesses have said they have seen things. And Nesta explains that she saw pure darkness, which was like incredibly similar to the inside of the cauldron. And Gwen's like, we need to go higher. And Nesta's like, I have books to shelve. And Gwen's like, just leave it. Don't look back. They're like heading out. And Nesta's like, is it following us? And Gwen says, no, but I can feel something like a cat. Small, clever, and curious. It's watching. And Gwen pulls a stone out of her pocket and it's like flickering with this light. And she tells Nesta to hurry and keep moving. Gwen explains that the stone is an invoking stone. It's similar to the Illyrian's siphons, but it can only be used for healing and protection, as it like channels the priestess's magic. It can't be used for like attacking like the siphons can. And Nesta asks, what was that darkness? And Gwen says, they say that the being that dwelled down there is gone, but I believe some piece of it might have lingered, or at the very least altered the darkness itself. And Nesta's like, it didn't feel like that. It felt older. And Gwen says, are you adept at such things? And Nesta says, do you know who I am? Gwen says, I know you as the High Lady's sister, that you slew the King of Hybern, that you, like Lady Feyre, were once mortal, human. Nesta explains, I was made by the cauldron, at the King of Hybern's order, and she explains like what happened to her and Elain. And Gwen says, like calls to like, maybe don't go down past level 6 again. And Nesta says, it's my job to shelve books. And Gwen is like, no, just tell Clotho what happened, and she'll give those books to others. And Nesta says, it seems cowardly. And Gwen says, I don't wish to learn what might come crawling out of that darkness. If you, cauldron maid, fear it, especially if it's drawn to you. They make it back up to the fourth level where Nesta's cart is, and Gwen plops herself into a chair, and Nesta like plops down next to her, and they like continue to chat about what happened to Nesta. And Gwen is like, you slew the King of Hybern with the Shadow Singer's knife. And Nesta says, luck and rage. I had made a promise to kill him for what he did to me and my sister. And then a priestess kind of like scurries past them, and Nesta can literally smell like how frightened she is of them. And Gwen explains that's Riven, and although she's been here for 80 years, she's still like quite scared of strangers. She doesn't know Riven's story because they don't gossip about each other. Like their stories are theirs alone to tell. And Gwen thanks Nesta for helping her out with the book situation a few days prior. Nesta's kind of like rubbing out her legs, and Gwen asks about it, and Nesta explains that she's been training with Cassian. Gwen asks a lot of questions about like why she's training and how. They just start like chatting. Girl talk. Before she leaves, Nesta asks Gwen why she doesn't wear her invoking stone on her head like most of the other acolytes do. And Gwen says, because I don't deserve to. Nesta's up the next morning at training, and they are continuing to work on simple movements to help with her balance. And Nesta, of course, is complaining about it. Cassian says, you have a lot of things to work on with the basics. We can't move on until you fix those things or you'll get injured. And Nesta goes, like you stand so perfectly. Cassian says, I do. I've been training since I was a child. I was never given the chance to learn how to stand incorrectly. You have 25 years of bad habits to break. And Nesta goes, do you truly enjoy this endless exercising and training? Cassian says, 2 more and then I'll tell ya. He finishes her I think she's doing lunges. And then he tells her about his childhood. And we learn that he was born to an unwed female who was shunned for having a child out of wedlock and forced to give birth alone in the tent in the middle of winter. And Nesta says, what of your father? And Cassian says, you mean the man who forced himself on her and then went back to his wife and family? There were no consequences for him. Nesta says, there never are. And she's thinking about Tomas, who, we learn that I don't think Tomas is dead. I hope she goes back and murders him. Or maybe Elain murdered him. I think that would be cutie fun too. I hope Tomas is dead. That's one thing I wish for this book series. Cassian says, there are consequences here. And he explains that Rhys has changed the laws for the Night Court in Illyria. But it is still difficult because the survivors need to come forward in order for them to obviously carry out these laws, and that it's really made difficult in places like Illyria for survivors to do that because they're often shunned from their communities for acting like a snitch. And so it is still, as much as there's laws in place, they're not always upheld because of the difficulties of having to report. And Nesta goes, that's outrageous. And Cassian says, we're immortal. Change comes slower for us. Excuses, Cassian. Then Nesta asks about Cassian's mother, and we learn that Cassian was taken away from her when he was 3, and then she spent the rest of her life doing back-breaking labor at one of the war camps until she died. It all happened before Rhys was High Lord, so they really didn't have any power to change anything, and there was not much they could do to help. He's like, it's a longer story for another time, but the training was a centering practice for him that kept him grounded through all. Or Cassian says to her, you said the other day, the breathing helped you. It helped me too. It helped Feyre. She watched the wall rise in his eyes, word after word, as if he were waiting for her to rip him down. Make of that what you will, but it's true. Oily shame slithered through her. She'd done that, brought this level of defensiveness to him. And so Nesta kind of in response to this, and in response to her shame, instead of getting mad, she asks him to show her more. The house keeps bringing Nesta new romance novels. Every time she finishes one, it brings her a new one. And it like clearly has a taste for them. The house loves a romance novel. The house is such a girl's girl. She laughs as one of the books plops on her nightstand. She can't remember the last time it's laughed. She like truly laughed. It might have been before her mother died. I don't know what's happening in the Archern household. Like, you can laugh if you're poor. Like, why weren't these girlies laughing? I feel like this was a big plot point for Feyre too, in which Lucien was like, she's laughing again for the first time. It's crazy to me that you guys didn't have a little giggle. What were you guys doing? You haven't laughed since your mom died? I think her mom died. Well, they became poor when she was like 14 or 15, but I actually think it was a few years before that their mother died. Like, I think it took a couple of years. So she hasn't laughed since she was like 12. Anyway, but the house doesn't bring her dinner tonight because it wants her to go eat with the boys. Nesta tries to convince the house to like let her eat in her room, but it doesn't. Just opening the door and being like, get out there. She gets to the dining room and it's just Cassian there tonight. He's looking gorgy in the golden hour. The sun is like streaming through his hair. I'm confused on when they're eating dinner because it is fall, we're told. So like, are they eating dinner during golden hour in the fall? It's like pretty late. Maybe the time change. They don't have daylight savings time. I don't know. We're at the time of year where the sun sets at 4:30 p.m. here, and it is truly the worst. Heinous torture. I'm just wondering when golden hour falls, what time do they eat dinner here at the House of Wind? Cassian makes some small talk about asking how her library worked for the day, and Nesta says, well, nothing tried to eat me today, so I guess it was fine. And Cassian says, something tried to eat you the other day, and Nesta goes, well, it didn't get close enough to try, but that was the general impression I received. Cassian siphons like light up at that, and he says, tell me more. So Nesta tells him about being on the lower levels and then what happened and how Gwyn had helped her. She hadn't seen Gwyn again, but she had left a note. Gwyn had left a note on her cart that said, just a friendly reminder, stay away from the lowest levels. Cassian looks pale as she recounts the story, and he tells her about the time that he had encountered Bryaxis and how it was like the worst of his nightmares. He mentions that like Bryaxis rivaled a lot of the monsters he put in the prison, and he is still like a little freaked out by the idea that she's just like still loose out there in the world. He's clearly feeling like a little bit guarded, which hurts Nesta's feelings, and she tries to like break it down and have like a pleasant conversation with him. And so she asks him about some of the creatures that he's put away in the prison. Cassian says the worst things that you've heard stories about, and he like talks about these ancient beings that were here before the High Fae. He tells a particular story about Lanthus, who he encountered when he was 300 years old. And Lanthus could turn into wind and rip the air right out of your lungs, or turn into rain and drown you on dry land. He could peel the skin from your body with a few movements, and he appeared to Cassian as a swirling mist, but that's not his true form, and he's just like essentially like evil incarnate. Lanthus seems like a bad thing, and Nesta says, how did you trap such a thing? And Cassian explains that there was no way to beat him in combat or in magic. Like, Lanthus rivaled Cassian, was like so much better than Cassian in both of those aspects, and so he used Lanthus's own arrogance against him, and he tricked him into a mirror. He like trapped him in a mirror. By the time he was able to free himself from the mirror, Cassian had already dumped the mirror inside the prison. And Nesta goes, wow, not just a brute after all. Cassian says, of all the occupants of the prison, Lanthus is the one I dread finding a way out. Nesta asks, would such a thing ever happen? And Cassian says, I don't think so. Thank the cauldron. That prison is unescapable. Unless you're Amren, which means it's not unescapable and you should stay on your toes. Cassian. Nesta asks about the other creatures that Cassian's put in there, and he lists a few. He lists Lubia, which is a 7-headed creature from deep in the ocean who ate girls, and a blue anise, a cobalt blue monster who also loved to eat the girlies. And he points out a scar that Anise gave him. And Nesta goes, that's enough. I don't know how you can stand having faced all that. Cassian says, you learn to live with it, how to block the horrors from your present thoughts. But they still lurk there in the back of your mind. And then Cassian asks if she thinks the creature in the library was drawn to her because of her magic. And Nesta says, I don't have any magic. And Cassian says, okay, well, who left those burnt marks on the stairs? And Nesta says, I don't know, maybe Lucien. I don't know, maybe Lucien. He was like climbing stairs the other day, maybe. And he like he has fire magic, so like maybe he did it. And Cassian's like, no. He said your fire was different from his, that yours burned cold somehow. And Nesta says, perhaps you should lock me up in that prison then. And Cassian's like, I'm just asking you a question. Like, I thought we were having a pleasant conversation, and now Nesta's getting mean and cagey. And Nesta says, does it matter if I have powers? And Cassian says, the kind of powers you have should not sit idly by. They need an outlet and training. Nesta says, balancing and stretching. And Cassian says, what happened with you and Amren? And Nesta's like, why so many questions tonight? Oh my God, leave me alone. Cassian says, we're talking like normal people, and I want to know. about all of it. Nesta says, what does it matter to you? And she gets up from the table. And Cassian says, let's not retread old territory, Ness. And Nesta goes, I hadn't realized we'd moved beyond it. And Cassian goes, BS. Baloney. Nesta says, here's the part where you remind me that everyone hates me and I leave. And Cassian stands up and blocks her from walking to the door. And he says to her, it never mattered to me whether you took half the cauldron's power or a drop of it. It still doesn't matter. And Nesta goes, why even bother? Cassian says, why did you stay at my side when we went up against the King of Hybern during that last battle? And Nesta goes, because I was a stupid fool. And she pushes past him into the hallway, but Cassian just follows her. And he says, you're afraid. What is it that you are afraid of? And Nesta says, I'm not afraid of anything. Cassian goes, liar. And Nesta turns and glares at him, and as all of his siphons light up. Cassian says, do you know how your eyes glow when your power rises to the surface? Like molten steel. Like silver fire. Silver. Why doesn't the silver flames? Come on. Sarah, it should say like molten steel, like silver flames. Nesta starts like walking towards Cassian, and Cassian just holds his ground until she's inches from him, snarling while he just keeps grinning. And Cassian says to her, beautiful. And he lets Nesta put a hand on his chest and back him all the way up against a wall. Nesta couldn't move as Cassian leaned to whisper in her ear. The first time I saw that look on your face, you were still human. Still human, and I nearly went to my knees before you. Right. I actually, if like gun to my head, I had to pick a favorite quote from the entirety of the ACOTAR series, it might be that one. This one is like personally incredibly important to me. You were still a human and I nearly went to my knees before you. Right. Right. I'm obsessed. I love the fact that it was like when she was still a human, so she wasn't like a cool fae girly with all this magic power. I love the fact that it's her like intensity, her like this like fierceness, this viciousness that Nesta has inside of her, that Cassian is like, yes, that's for me. That's my girl. I'm obsessed with it. This is like just like personally incredibly important to me. It continues. His breath caressed the shell of her ear, and she couldn't stop her eyes from fluttering shut. His smile brushed against her temple. Your power is a song, and one I've waited a very, very long time to hear, Nesta. Her back arched slightly at the way he said her name, the way he bit out the second syllable. Nesta's holding a fistful of his shirt, and then Cassian leans in and breathes in the smell of her. Nesta feels like she's let things go a little too far, but she can't pull away as he brushes his nose along her neck. She like wants him, obviously. Nesta pulls her hand back, but Cassian stops, placing his hand over hers and just like caressing her with his thumb. And Cassian says, do you know what I'm going to think of tonight? And he drops her hand as she makes a little noise, and Nesta like immediately misses his touch. And he says to her, I'm going to think of that look on your face. He took another step down the hall. I am always thinking of that look on your face. Obsessed. Right. Right. That night, Nesta goes to bed. She cannot sleep. She's thinking about what Cassian said to her about like the fact that he is always thinking about that look on her face. And Nesta tells the house to leave because she needs her privacy. She's like, you can come back in the morning, but I need a night alone, because she's thinking about what Cassian might be up to alone in his room. And then Nesta does think about Cassian as she gets herself off real quick. Cassian doesn't sleep that well that night. He is a little bit too turned on by what happened between him and Nesta. He feels a little awkward seeing her the next morning at breakfast. She's reading a book at the table, and Cassian says, what are you reading? And Nesta goes, a romance. Cassian says, I gathered that. What's this one about? Nesta blushes and is like embarrassed, and Cassian is imagining what she might have gotten up to last night. And Nesta says, this is a book it's about a book. And Cassian says, interesting, sounds great. Things are very heated in the room, and Cassian is like, where is Az when you need him? They need their chaperone. They need an adult. He's got to get out of there. He's got to make an escape. The book, Nesta repeated. So he like leaves. He's like, I actually gotta go. Things are getting too tense in the room. And then Nesta is like, oh my God, why did I say that? The book is about a book. She like cups her forehead in her hands, and she's just like, idiot. Not long later, they both go up to training. They're both anxious about the training session today because of the tension, but they're trying to play it cool. We're upgrading from stretching to balancing today to core work. And Nesta's like, you are going to make me look like that, pointing at his abs. And Cassian says, no one but me looks like this, Ness. And Nesta's like, Reese and Az both do. Cassian says, I've got 1 or 2 muscles on them. Nesta says, I don't see it. Cassian says, maybe they're in other places. Nesta really struggles with the ab exercises. She's trying to hold a plank, but she can't hold it for more than a few seconds. Cassian's like, I can hold a plank for 5 minutes. And Nesta's like, I'm sorry, I haven't had 500 years of core work. He's led her through this whole series of exercises, but she like really struggles to do like any of them. And Nesta's like, why do you do it? And Nesta's like, why don't you do these exercises with me? Cassian's like, they're too easy for me. And then he does like this more intense and like faster ab routine that he executes, obviously, perfectly. Nesta's admiring him while he's working out. And she thinks to herself, in another age, another world, he might have been deemed a warrior god by mortals. After what he told her about the monsters that he'd put in the prison, he might very well be considered a great hero in this age. The kind that would one day be whispered about around a fire. People would name their children after him. Warriors would want to be him. A fine warrior would be known as Cassian Reborn. And she'd called him a brute. And then Nesta goes, are there really no female fighting units amongst the Illyrians? And Cassian says, we tried it once and it failed spectacularly, so no, there aren't. Nesta says, because Illyrians are backwards and horrible. Cassian says, progress is slow. It's an ongoing goal of ours. Me and Rhys, I mean. And Nesta says, is it difficult for a female to become a warrior? Cassian says, well, it's not just the training. It's running the social gauntlet too. And then there's the blood rite, which they also have to complete. And Nesta asks what the blood rite is. We've heard about the blood rite vaguely before, but we're going to get more depth about it today. Cassie explains that when a warrior comes into their full power, usually in their like mid-20s, they have to do the blood rite to become full warriors and adults. They get dropped into the Illyrian mountains with 2 goals. 1, to survive, and 2, to make it to Ramiel, the sacred mountain, which is like the symbol of the Night Court. And the blood rite always takes place when the 3 stars, guys, I'm going to butcher these names, Arctosian, Carthian, and Oryston are like above the peak. Our 3 holy stars shine above it for 1 week on the year. On the final day of the rite, they're directly above its peak. They're the men are dumped with nothing but the clothes on their back, and they have to fight their way to the mountain. And once you're in, you can't leave or until like the week is over or until you reach the peak of Ramiel. If anyone breaks into the rite to extract you or save you, the law declares that both of you will be hunted down and killed for the transgression. And even Rhysand, the High Lord himself, is not exempt from these laws. There is a spell that like prevents the use of any magic. And the Illyrians get like magic powers to winnow people just for this 1 night a year. Okay, that's kind of fun. Weapons are banned, but you can make your own, obviously, once you arrive. Some clans really value like a high body count during the blood rite, so murdering is like quite commonplace. Also, there are like a lot of monsters and scary, spooky creatures roaming around during that. Also, the mountain that they need to climb at the end is like incredibly brutal. It's like a full day and night of climbing. Once they reach the top, there's a sacred stone atop it. If you touch the sacred stone, you immediately win and you are out. You finish. You get to be done. But everyone who survives until the final day is considered a warrior. You don't actually have to make it to the top of this mountain in order to like complete the blood rite. You just have to survive. There are 3 levels to the warriors who complete the blood rite. The bottom level is the Arctosians, the one who don't make it to the mountain but survive. The Orystian are the ones who make it to the mountain but don't reach the top. And the Carthinian are the ones who scale the summit and are considered elite warriors. Touching the stone atop Ramiel is to win the rite. Only a dozen warriors in the past 5 centuries have reached the mountain at all. Cassian goes on to say, Rhys, Az, and I touched it together even though we were deliberately separated from each other in the beginning. When they put into the blood rite, the leaders feared them so much that they hoped that the blood rite would get them killed. But what they learned was that they loved each other as true brothers, and there was nothing that they wouldn't do to reach each other, to save each other. They made it through the breaking, which is like the most difficult path up Ramiel, and only 6 men in total, including that trio, who have ever made it to Ramiel's summit and have become Carthinian. 2 of the 3 of the Carthinians that were not Rhys, Az, or Cass, died in Hybern in that blast that Nesta had saved Cassian from. And Nesta says, so you think females can't participate in that, right? And Cassian says, Moore would likely win the damn thing in record time, but no. I wouldn't even want her participating in the rite. He doesn't say it, but the worry is obviously that the women would have like kind of a whole nother layer of challenges if they were put in the rite, a different type of violence that they would have to endure at the hands of these men. But a female unit would have to endure the blood rite in order to be considered warriors by the rest of Illyrians, and no one else would, or else like no one will fly with them. They wouldn't be able to like fight alongside other Illyrians unless they completed the blood rite. Cassian explains that the training that the women get is less about getting them ready to serve in a war, but helping them like master their own fear and like channel their own strength and like be able to like handle themselves amongst these like warrior men. Nesta says, what do they fear? And Cassian says, becoming my mother, going through what she endured. And Nesta thinks about the priestesses who don't leave the mountain, who like remain there for their entire lives. And Nesta asks, would you train non-Illyrians? And Cassian says, I'm training you, aren't I? And Nesta says, the priestess is in the library. If I invited them to train with us here where it is private and safe, would you train them? And Cassian says, yes. I mean, of course, but Nesta, many of the females in the library cannot stand to be around males again. And Nesta says, well, we'll ask one of your female friends to join, maybe more. And Cassian says, the priestesses might not even be able to stomach having me present. And Nesta says, you'd never heard anyone like that. And Cassian says, I still might drag up memories that are incredibly difficult to face. Nesta says, you said during my training that you would help me with my problems. Perhaps it could help them. At the very least, give them a reason to get outside for a bit. Cassian, loves the idea. Moore is currently out of town, and Nesta, does not want to bring in Feyre. Although, he's, obviously still updating the two of them about what's going on here. But he tells Nesta to, talk to Clotho about it. He's like, talk to Clotho. She'll have, a better idea if this is at all feasible. Nesta does go to Clotho that afternoon, and she asks her, if Clotho would consider allowing her priestesses to train, just, at the ring at the house. Just whoever's interested. And Clotho is train for what? And Nesta says to strengthen their bodies and defend themselves against attack if they wish, but also to help clear their minds, to help study them. And she explains that Cassian will oversee the training. And Clotho is I don't think Minnie would come. And Nesta says, I know, but even one or two I'd like to offer. I'll put up a sign-up sheet, and whoever wants to is welcome to join. And Clotho says, whoever wants to join has my complete blessing. Nesta puts up the sign-up sheet that afternoon, but the next morning, it's still blank. Nesta tells Cassie that no one signed up, and he says, give it some time. And he says to her, keep reaching out your hand. She checks the list every day. Oh, that actually really made me emotional. I was like, oh, that one hit me. I love that he echoes Amren's words back to her, that this advice to keep reaching out her hand, which is what he is doing to her, is what he's telling Nesta to give to the priestesses, to give these hurt women space and time. It reminds me, there's I saw it on Instagram at some point. I love an Instagram poem. One thing about me, I love an Instagram poem. Sign me the heck up for some Instagram poetry. It became this point that I came back to again and again as I was writing my first book. I'll put it on the screen. But it goes, question, how do you make a monster stop feeling so monstrous? You give her something she can hold in her palms without crushing. You give her something sweet and tell her to keep it. You wipe the blood from her hands. You say her name over and over again, like an absolution. You forgive her. You forgive her. You forgive. And I do think I love this idea of how do you make something monstrous feel less monstrous? And it's you have to give them something fragile and trust them that they won't break it. I think you allow someone to become less monstrous by treating them as if they are not a monster. And I think that's what we're doing with Nesta here, is we have given her these incredibly fragile women and asking her in a way to take care of them, trusting her to do so. And I do think that's why when we'll get to it, there's a moment in which Rhys really questions this, and it is one of the cruelest things I think he does in this book. Again, you'll get to it. But I do love this moment because I think Cassian is entrusting her with these priestesses in this moment. And it is Nesta's idea to envision this, but by placing her in the library, she was given this that's a place of trust. This is a place in which these women feel safe. And I do feel we don't get to really see the thought process that goes behind putting Nesta in the library, but I do think it is incredibly important that she's given this place in which she's put with these incredibly fragile women, and she is trusted to be around them, even though she's this vicious creature. Anyway, Nesta keeps checking the list every day, but it remains empty. And Nesta just continues to practice her training. She's really doing a lot with it. She's leaning more into footwork and body positioning. Nesta is getting stronger. She's holding her planks longer. She's adding weights to her workouts to help continue to build muscle and strengthen her arms. And because she's Fae, this is coming on a much quicker than it would for a human. And she's also doing the stairs regularly, and she's making it farther and farther. She makes it to step 500 and then 600 and then 750. She's growing and changing. We love this for her. Every night she is exhausted, barely reading a chapter in her romance books before falling asleep, and she gifts the house one of her own romance books that Elain had given her on, I think it's the book that Elain got her for solstice, if I had to guess. One night, and then the next night the house gives her a bouquet of fall flowers. She barely ever sees Gwyn when she is at the library because Meryl has been pushing really hard with this Valkyrie research, and she's taken to using her books to train, holding up heavy books while doing like lunges up and down the ramp. Every day she continues to check up the sign-up sheet and it continues to be empty. Keep reaching out your hand, Cassian had told her. But would it matter? She began to wonder if no one bothered to reach back. Cassian is teaching Nesta to punch today, aka not tucking her thumb into her fist because she'll break her thumb. They spend a couple days perfecting her stance before they even throw the first punch, and he's giving her instructions to make sure she hits the right spot so she doesn't break her fingers. And Nesta says, considering how many ways there are to break my own hands when punching someone, it doesn't really seem worth it. Cassian says, that's why a good warrior knows when to pick his battles. You have to ask yourself if the risk is worth it each time. And Cassian explains that he usually has perfect form, but he has broken his hand about 10 times over the course of his life. And Cassian says to her, I can't be perfect every moment of every day, Ness. And then he teaches her to move from like her core. And Nesta says, so those abdominal exercises are useful beyond wanting to show off your muscles? And Cassian says, you really just think all this is for show? And Nesta says, I think I've caught you looking at yourself in the mirror at least a dozen times each lesson. And Cassian says, liar, you use that mirror to watch me when you think I'm not paying attention. And Nesta refuses to respond because obviously she does. She's just a girl. Nesta continues training and it really starts to like quiet her mind. And when her thoughts get too loud, she takes the stairs. It's not getting rid of the thoughts. She knows they're still there. It's just like allowing her some space. It's kind of, it's healthier than I think the drinking was probably, if I had to guess, but there is the sense that she's not really dealing with them, and she like talks about it as if her thoughts are still like waiting, like wolves to rip her apart. That day after training, she goes up, this is the rough part, after training, she goes to her rooms and she finds Elain in the family's private library. And Elain is looking like really good and really healthy. And Elain says, I thought I'd drop by to see how you were doing. And Nesta says, I've been busy. She's like already, like Nesta's going into this pissed. Okay. And Elain says, you look a little better than you did a few weeks ago. And Nesta is thinking about how last time they had been in this place together, their roles had been reversed. Now, somehow, Nesta had become the ghost, worse than a ghost, a wraith, whose rage and hunger were bottomless, eternal. And Elain is like, are you enjoying your time up here? Nesta's looking at her sister, and like Elain has always been the prettiest sister, but now as a high fae, she is just like devastatingly beautiful, and Elain just like doesn't even seem to realize it. It's always been that way between them. Elain, sweet and oblivious, and Nesta, the snarling wolf at her side, poised to shred anyone who threatened her. Her mother had trained Nesta that Elain was beautiful, but not like conniving enough. They would be responsible for getting Elain a good match. Like Elain, because she's so beautiful, could really get them like a good match that would like really do a lot for them socially. Her mother had wanted them to go to the continent to find royal matches because she was like, no one here in this like little slither of human land is worth it, you guys. Nesta goes, I don't have a choice but to be here, so I don't see how I could be enjoying myself. And Elain says, I know the circumstances for you coming here were awful, but that doesn't mean you need to be so miserable about it. And Nesta says, I sat by your side for weeks while you wasted away, refusing food and drink, while you appeared to hope you'd just wither and die. No one suggested that you either shape up or be shipped back to the human lands. Elain says, I wasn't drinking myself into oblivion and doing those other things. Nesta says, sleeping with strangers? You're living amongst beings who have none of our human primness, you know. It's not like you and Grayson didn't act on your feelings. Shots fired. Shots fired. Also, Grayson mentioned, someone asked me about who I thought Elain was going to end up with, and I said, I don't know. I don't think Grayson is off the table. I think it would be interesting. We're going to talk about Elain for just a second and what I think is going to happen to Elain. One, I think Elain better be up to something. If Elain is as boring as she appears, but I don't think she is. I think she's doing things. I think she's cooking up something in the back. And I don't want her to end up with either of her, like, love interests. Can I talk about who they are? I think so. I think at this point, like, if you're this far in, you know. Like, we obviously have Lucian, who is, like, mated to her, and then Azriel. And I don't... You know, I've, like, mentioned I don't love Lucian. And I, like, really don't like Lucian in this book and last book. I'm just, like, he annoys me. And I do think it would be weird if all the sisters ended up with, like, essentially all the brothers. Like, that's a weird situation. Like, I have nothing against Az. I love Az. I think he's the sweetest little guy. I, like, he reminds me, like, so much of Dorian in a lot of ways. But I also think in the very Dorian sense, Azriel does fall in love with every pretty girl he sees. Bless his sweet little baby heart. He's a romantic. I, like, say this with all the love in my heart. And so, like, I do think he has a crush on Elain. And I do think they would work better together than Lucian and Elain, but I don't love them together. I, like, think there needs to be a third option for Elain. I think there needs to be a third option. I think Grayson is an interesting third option for Elain. I also proposed the Shadow Wraiths. I think that'd be fun. I, like, think of... I don't know. I want something really interesting for Elain in terms of her romance. I don't want Lucien. I don't want her to be forced into a relationship that I just don't think really works with her and Lucien just because they're mated. We'll talk about it later. We'll continue to talk about this. Maybe I'll do at the very end of this, I'll make some predictions for what I think is going to happen in the next book. But anyway, Grayson mentioned, I had to mention that I'm really clocking every mention of Grayson because Grayson and her, what do you mean Grayson and her hooked up? Interesting. I don't know, it just seems very un-Elain-like. Especially every time we see Grayson, he's such an a-hole. And I'm I don't know if Elain would have just been in love with this boy to the extent if he was just the meanest boy in all the village. I don't know, I'm suspicious. Anyway, Elain goes, "You're angry with me." And Nesta goes, "Yeah, for packing my things while Rhysand and Feyre told me I'm a worthless piece of crap? Yeah." And Elain says, "Feyre warned me this might happen." The idea that Feyre and Elain are talking about Nesta behind Nesta's back makes her so angry. And she thinks to herself, it was inevitable, she supposed, stomach turning. She was a monster. Why wouldn't the two of them band together and shove her out? Even if she'd foolishly believed that Elain had always seen every horrible part of her and decided to stick by her anyway. "I wanted to come to see you to explain." And Nesta says, "There's nothing to explain." Elain says, "We did this because we love you." Nesta goes, "Spare me the baloney, please." And Elain goes, "It's the truth. We did this because we love you and we are worried for you. If Father was here." And Nesta goes, "Don't ever mention him again. Don't ever mention him to me again." And Elain goes, "Is this what all this is about? Father?" And Nesta says, "Get out." Elain goes, "There is nothing that could have been done to save him, Nesta." And Nesta says, "You tell yourself there's nothing that could have been done because it is unbearable to think that you could have saved him if only you had deigned to show up a few minutes earlier." It wasn't Elain's fault that their father had died. No, that was entirely Nesta's own fault. But if Elain was so determined to root out the good in her, then she'd show her sister how ugly she could be. Let a fraction of this agony rip into her. That is why Elain had chosen Feyre. This. Feyre had rescued Elain time and time again, but Nesta had sat by, armed with only her viper's tongue, sat by while they starved, sat by while Hybern stole them away and shoved them into the cauldron, sat by while Elain had been kidnapped and when their father had been in Hybern's grip. She had done nothing to save him either. Fear had frozen her, blanketing her mind, and she'd let it do so, let it master her, so by the time her father's neck had snapped, it had been too late and entirely her fault. Why wouldn't Elain choose Feyre? Elain is "You think I'm to blame for his death? No one is to blame but the king of Hybern." Nesta goes, "It doesn't matter what I think. Go back to Feyre and your little garden." And Elain goes, "Cassian said that he thought the training was helping." And Nesta says, "I'm sorry to disappoint." After Elain leaves, Nesta just sits and stares at the unlit fireplace. Nesta didn't stop the wolves when they gathered around her, hateful, razor-sharp truths in their red tongues. She didn't stop them as they began to rend her apart. Elain comes storming into the dining room where Cassian and Rhys are just returning from Windhaven where they were checking on the Illyrians. Cassian's not loving the direction the Illyrians are Cassian is not loving the direction things are moving, so they want to start preparing the Illyrians for a war, which they're going to be bummed out because we had a war less than 2 years ago. He's bummed because they'd really promised the family's peace for a while. And Elain comes in and she says, "I want to go home." And Cassian goes, "What happened?" And Elain says she's not getting any better. She's not even trying. And Cassian and Rhys are talking on their mental telephones and Cassian's "No, I swear she's getting better. I don't know what happened. Something must have set her off. No more unannounced visits from Elain." And Rhys goes, "What about Feyre?" And Cassian's "Yeah, definitely not Feyre. She does not want Feyre here." And Rhys starts to get pissy about that because he's how dare she not want Feyre here? But Cassian is "Calm down. They have their own issues to sort out. You're threatening to obliterate Nesta every time it comes up. It does not help. You are making things worse, Rhys." And then Rhys flies Elain home and Cassian goes to check on Nesta. And he goes, "What the hell happened?" as he walks into the library. And Nesta says, "I don't want to talk to you." And Cassian says, "What did you say to Elain?" And Nesta says, "Of course you'd assume that I'm the one at fault, always defending sweet, innocent Elain." And Cassian says, "I'll remind you that you have been the chief defender of sweet, innocent Elain until recently." And it's freezing in the library, so Cassian asks the house to light a fire. And Nesta goes, "No fire." And the house seems to ignore her. She says it again, louder, "No fire." As the fire cracks, Nesta flinches, fear washing over her face for a moment. And then Nesta just gets up and leaves the library. And Cassian goes, "Where are you going?" And Nesta says, "Out. Leave me alone." Nesta storms over to the door to the staircase. And he goes, "What's the plan, Ness? You tear into the people who love you, and eventually they give up and leave you alone? Is that what you want?" And Nesta opens her mouth and shuts it, as if she wants to shield him from herself. And Cassian says, "Just say it. Just say it." And she looks back at him, those eyes full of silver flames, his siphons light, ready for battle, but then the flames are gone. replaced by something dead and vacant. It was like gazing into the unseeing eyes of a fallen soldier on a battlefield. He had seen Crow's picket eyes that dead. And Nesta just heads down the stairs with only her breathing for company. She wants out of her own head and her own body. She wants to drink enough to silence the voices in her head, but it's not until step 800 that her legs begin to shake. She stops at step 1000. She leans against the stone wall, and it's as if for a moment she can hear a heartbeat within the stone. Then she starts back up the stairs. She has to stop 5 times to catch her breath, and she's crawling by the time she reaches the top. And Cassian is there waiting for her. And she comes up. She's tired now, and she says to him, "I don't feel like sparring with you. Good night." He blocks her path. Cassian asks, "What step did you reach this time?" 1000. Impressive. She tries to get past him, but he refuses to move out of her way. And he says, "What set you off today? What did Elain say?" And Nesta can't talk about that conversation. It just is too painful. And she says instead to Cassian, "Why don't they sign up for training?" And Cassian says, "Maybe they're not ready." And Nesta says, "I really thought they'd sign up." And Cassian says, "Is that what you're upset about?" And Nesta says, "Some of them have been here for hundreds of years, and they still haven't been able to come back from what they endured. So what hope do I have?" Cassian says, "We've barely been working for 2 weeks, Nesta. Physically, you might be seeing changes, but what is happening in your mind will take longer. It took Feyre months. I don't want to hear about Feyre and her special journey. I don't want to hear about Rhys's journey or Morgan's or anyone's." And Cassian goes, "Why?" "Because I don't." Cassian says, "Then I will tell you about my special journey, Ness." "No." Cassian continues, ignoring her no. "I slaughtered every person who hurt my mother. When I was old and strong enough, I went back to the village where I was born, where I'd been ripped from her arms, and I learned that she was dead, and no one was there. And there was no one I could fight to change that. They refused to tell me where they buried her. One of the females hinted that they dumped her off of a cliff, so I destroyed them. Anyone who wasn't responsible, children and some females and the elderly, I let them live. But anyone who had played a role in her suffering, I made them suffer in return. Rhys and Az helped me. Found the piece of crap who sired me, I let my brothers tear him apart before I finished him myself. It took me 10 years before I was able to face it. What I'd done to those people, what I'd lost, 10 years. So if you want to take 10 years to face whatever is eating you alive from the inside out, go ahead. If you want to take 20 years, go ahead." Nesta asks, "Do you regret what you did?" Cassian says no. And Nesta tries to look away, and Cassian holds her chin. He's holding her face. And he says, "Whatever you need to throw at me, I can take it. I won't break." No challenge, lace the words, only a plea. Nesta's like, "You don't understand. I'm not like you and the others." And Cassian says, "That's never bothered me one bit." Nesta says it should. It bothers everyone, even oh-so-special Rhysand. Cassian says, "I told you once, and I'll say it again. Don't take that snide tone when you speak about him. Stop. Let her hate her sister's husband as a little treat. Don't be rude, okay? I love Rhys. Nesta and Rhys are my 2 favorite characters in the series, but sometimes he does need to be knocked down a peg. He does get a little bit of a big head sometimes." And Nesta says, "He's not my High Lord. I will speak of him as I wish." Cassian grabs her wrist, and Nesta tells him to let her go, and he insists that she use her training to make him let go. And Nesta says, "You are an arrogant bastard." And Cassian says, "And you are a haughty witch. We are evenly matched." Drink every time someone calls Nesta a witch in this book. Cassian drops her hand and then turns away, but Nesta can't let him win, so she kisses him on the mouth, obviously. The best way to win a fight is to kiss the other person on the lips. Duh. And then he's kissing her hard, pressing her against the wall. The makeout gets hot and heavy. Nesta's doing some heavy petting. Cassian bites her neck, a little Tamlin core, but we'll let it slide. And then Cassian does need to change his pants. Yes, Cassian does have to get new pants on. Mm-hmm. Cassian's blushing. Nesta's pushing him away. She didn't wait to hear his words of regret, that this had been a mistake. She wouldn't let him hold that over her. So Nesta curled her lips into a cold, cruel smile and said as she left, "Someone's quick off the mark." The next morning at breakfast, Cassian's a little embarrassed about what happened, and Azriel goes, "Did something happen that I, as your chaperone, should know about?" Cassian says, "No." Azriel has come to fetch them to bring them both to the river house, both Cassian and Nesta. It's not about what happened with Elain, but what Az had uncovered, and it requires both of them. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be good news. Cassian flies Nesta down to the river house. The vibes are awkward, and they don't really talk. And Cassian promises Nesta the meeting should be pretty quick. Nesta is really nervous. She doesn't know, one, who's going to be there, and if they'll be judging her for the progress that she is making. On the way in, Cassian pauses at the, in the front entryway and points out a painting. It's of Ramael that Feyre has painted. And Cassian's like, "I wonder when she saw it." Nesta's like, Rhys probably showed her in his mind. Obviously, don't be weird. They arrive down at the study and they find Feyre, Rhys, Amren, and Azriel waiting for them. Cassian tries to kiss Feyre on the cheek again, but she's still shielded. He comments on how weird it is, and then Rhys is like, whatever. He like brushes aside the weirdness. Amren and Nesta share a tension-filled stare. The vibes between them are not great. Azriel explains that Elain is the only queen left in the palace. The other human queens have fled. Baron did meet with her, but the main goal was to find the cauldron again and to like regain her youth. Amren says she'll never find the cauldron. No one but us, Miriam, and Draken know where it's hidden. Even if Elain did uncover its location, there are enough words and spells on it that no one could ever break through. And as says Courtier, the like dude that has her captured, has been pointing her towards the Dread Trove. He wants to use it to free him from the lake. She and Courtier are allies. And Nesta says, what is the Dread Trove? Amren explains that it is a trio of cauldron-made weapons, and Rhys says, the mask, the harp, and the crown. Amren begins to explain more. She says, the mask can raise the dead, wear it, and you can summon the dead to command them to march to your will. The harp can open any door, physical or otherwise, some say even between worlds. The crown can influence anyone, although even piercing through the mightiest of mental shields, its only flaw is that it requires close physical proximity to initially sink its claws into the victim's mind. But wear the crown and you can make your enemies do your bidding. And Nesta's like, okay, great. Are they lost? And Rhys is like, yeah. And Nesta says, okay, what does that have to do with the cauldron? And Feyre says, like calls to like. Elain was made, though. Can't she track the cauldron herself? And Amren says, the cauldron aged Elain to punish her, but I think you took something from it when you seized your power, girl. Yeah, obviously we know. And Feyre's like, what happened in the cauldron to Nesta? And everyone's staring at her. Cassian's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, I don't know if we should delve down this road. I don't know if Nesta will act like a polite young lady if she's talking about cauldron time. And Feyre's like, it'll really help us to gain insight. And Cassian's like, can't we discuss it later? And Nesta begins. As soon as everyone turns towards her, her hands start shaking. And she like feels like she gets tangled up in her own thoughts as she's trying to like remember to like breathe and like push past the trauma of the cauldron. Remember how she couldn't even take a bath? This is like a lot for her. She says, I wasn't aware of what I took, just that I was taking things that the cauldron did not want me to have. It seemed fitting, given what it was doing to me. And Feyre says, so it's highly possible that the cauldron couldn't imbue Elain with the ability to track it. All it could do was give Elain the ability to track anything it made. A sorry shadow of the original gift. So it seems like Nesta might have taken the ability to track the cauldron out of the cauldron. Cassian smiles at Nesta like he's proud of her, which is like a little embarrassing because like all she did was like speak nicely. Amren continues, if you gather all three objects, you could use the potency of their combined made essence to track down the cauldron, and no matter where it is. They don't really know what would happen if the entire trove is reunited, but it seems bad. And then Nesta asks, what is a Death Lord? Because they were like talking about that. And Cassian says, remember how I told you about Lanthus? He is literally deathless. Nothing can kill him. Courtier too cannot be killed. He's the master of his own death. They are Death Lords. And Amren shudders, which like freaks Nesta out because Amren's like the spookiest, ookiest thing that Nesta knows. Elain wants to find the trove to find the cauldron, and Courtier wants to use the trove to free himself from his lake. Then Elain wants to ally with Baron to have a war to get more territory. They haven't found any of the pieces of the trove yet. Probably. They don't actually know that for sure. But it's supposed to be here in Prythian, so it'll be really difficult for them to get to because they are on the continent. It's unclear what Eris's soldiers have to do with it. Cassian needs to meet with Eris to talk with him, but they can't really start prepping for war without cluing in Baron to the fact that Eris has been talking to the Night Court. Amren explains that the objects have been magically forgotten, sort of, because they like want to remain hidden. It's like they're alive. And Rhys is like, just like I'm able to alter a mind to forget, perhaps they have a similar gift. Okay, Rhys, nobody asked you. This is literally not about you. There's like a bit of hand-waving here from Sarah J. Maas about like why this would be the first time we're hearing about the Dread Cove. Like, why wouldn't we like have sought it out in like Wings and Ruin? But like apparently going into the cauldron made Elain think harder about the Dread Cove, and Elain and Nesta probably have the same sort of thing in which the Dread Cove can't magically amnesia them because they're like cauldron made. I don't care. It doesn't like totally make sense. There's like a lot of hand waving and like that's fine with me. Let's keep it moving. And then Cassian's like, okay, so we need to track down the Dread Cove. And then Elain pops into the room. She's been like hiding around the corner waiting for this moment. She says, using me, her dramatic entrance. And Nesta goes, no. And Elain says, you do not decide what I can and cannot do, Nesta. And Nesta says, the last time we involved ourselves with the cauldron, it abducted you. I thought you didn't even have powers anymore. And Elain says, I thought you didn't have powers either. And they're like, we both know we have powers, obviously. And Nesta says, you will not go looking for it. And Amren says, so you go look for it, girl. I hate how Emerie calls everyone girl. It's really grating on me, this book. And Nesta says, I don't know how to find anything. I had a tricky time tracking on my shoes to get here this morning. And Emerie is like calls to like. The items of the trove will call to them and likely won't be able to be used upon them in the same way that Nesta was able to track the cauldron. Nesta says, okay, well, when I tracked the cauldron, it nearly killed me. It trapped me like a bird in a cage. And Elain says, then I will find it. I might require some time to reacquaint myself with my powers, but I could start today. And Nesta says, absolutely not. Elain says, shall I tend to my little garden forever? You can't have it both ways. You can't resent my decision to lead a small, quiet life, while also refusing to let me do anything greater. And Nesta says, go off on adventures, go drink and sleep with strangers, but stay away from the cauldron. And Feyre says, it's Elain's choice, Nesta. She's been spending too much time with Rhysand. And Nesta says, keep out of this, Feyre. And Elain says, I'm not a child to be fought over. And Nesta says, do you not remember the war? What we encountered? Do you not remember the cauldron kidnapping you? Bringing you into the heart of Hybern's camp? And Elain says, I do remember. And I remember Feyre rescuing me. Nesta says, look who decided to grow claws after all. Maybe you'll become interesting at last, Elain. Elain physically recoils from that. And Nesta can see that that blow really landed. And her chest hurts at the fact that she's hurt Elain so badly. Elain says, I went into the cauldron too, you know. It captured me, and yet somehow all you do is think about what my trauma did to you. And Elain leaves the room, and on her way out, she says, find me when you wish to begin. Feyre says, it wasn't an easy choice for me to ask Elain to endanger herself like this. And Nesta's like, can't you find the trove? You were trained as a warrior. Can't you find it? And Feyre says, no, I can't. Because I'm pregnant. And Cassian starts cheering. He is so excited. He tackles Rhys to the ground with a hug. He's laughing. He's whooping. He's so excited. Best news ever for Cassian. Amren, tells Feyre congratulations. And Rhys, gets rid of Feyre's shield. And immediately Nesta can smell, the pregnancy. There's something new growing inside of Feyre. They talk about how Rhys has been even more overprotective now that she's pregnant. She's only 2 months along. And Cassian says to Azriel, we're going to be uncles. And Nesta goes, congratulations. Feyre says, thank you. You'll be an aunt, you know. And Nesta makes sure Rhys knows she's not a threat to Feyre, because she knows if Rhys perceives Nesta as a threat to Feyre, he will kill her, especially now that Feyre is pregnant. He doesn't need that big of an excuse to murder Nesta. I think he would enjoy it. Elain has known for a little bit now because she had guessed it, because she had caught Feyre vomiting multiple mornings in a row. Moore doesn't know yet. They're going to tell her when she returns. And Feyre has to limit her magic usage for the next little bit because it might strain the pregnancy. Amren says, Elain will need time to dust off her powers to try to see the trove. But you, Nesta, you could scry again. And Rhys says, as swiftly as possible. Time is not our ally. And Nesta says, what about you? You're not made? And Amren says, not as you were. Are you afraid? And Nesta says, what choice do I have? She thinks to herself, if it was between her and Elain, there was no choice at all. She would always go first if it meant keeping Elain from harm, even if she'd hurt her sister more than she could stomach. You do have a choice, Rhys said firmly. You will always have a choice here. I don't think you can say that anymore, Nesta, because you did just lock her in a house. I guess the other choice was to just, go back to the human realms. You could have just cut her off. I think it would have been fair if her choice was, if you're going to keep spending your money, this is what needs to happen. Let her live her life out in Valaris if she wants to. It's crazy that you're we're going to send you back to the human realms. Okay, we're not going to bankroll your life anymore? Fair. We're going to put you in a place in which everyone around you will hate you and you're going to be, housebound? Not fair. Nesta threw him a cool look. I'll search for it. She glanced at her sister's stomach, the hand idly resting atop it. Of course I'll search for it. Cassian needs to talk to Rhys, so Nesta heads out into the hallway and Feyre follows her. And Feyre tells her that it's a boy. She says, I wanted you to know first. I told Rhys to wait until I told you, but Feyre chuckled as the renewed shouts of joy echoed down the hall. I suppose he's telling Azriel and Cassian now. And Nesta goes, how do you know? And Feyre says, the bone carver showed me a vision. Okay. And Nesta says, why not tell Elain about the baby's gender first? And Feyre says, she discovered the pregnancy. I wanted you to know this part before anyone else. And Nesta says, I didn't realize you had been keeping score. Feyre says, I'm not. Nesta, do I need an excuse to share things with you? You're my sister. I wanted to tell you before anyone else. That's it. And then the boys come out of the study and, Feyre tells Nesta, good luck. Azriel and Cassian are back at the house. They're sitting up in the sitting room that's between their bedrooms. I'm obsessed with the fact that Cassian and Azriel's bedrooms at House of Wind are Jack and Jill style, with a little room between them that they can go in and share. I think that's cute. They're talking about whether Nesta will be able to find the trove. Azriel wants her to scry as soon as possible, but Cassian is no, Nesta is not up for scrying. We don't even know how much power she has left. She has a lot. Clearly, they both have some power left in them, both her and Elain. And Azriel says, you do know. You've seen it, even beyond when it glows in her eyes. And Cassian's like, well, she's volatile right now. The last time she did scrying and it ended badly, the cauldron looked at her and then it took Elain. And Azriel says, I know. I helped rescue Elain. Cassian is like, she'll scry when she's ready. If we push it, it'll backfire. And then they start talking about how happy they are for Rhys and whether they want kids. And of course, Cassian thinks about Nesta. Cassian's like, of course I want children. And then he heads for the door. And then Cassian says, turn a blind eye, chaperone. He's been inspired. He says, I'm actually really inspired. I do want children. I'm going to go make some right now. Cassian goes to Nesta's room and finds Nesta in bed reading with her hair down. And Nesta's like, what? He's like staring at her. Cassian says, I've never seen you with your hair down. And Nesta says, it's a nuisance when it's down. Cassian says, it's beautiful. Nesta says, here for more. Cassian says, I'm here to settle the debt between us that I owe you from the other night. We have unfinished business. Nesta goes, male pride is a thing of wonder. Why are you even here? You made it clear enough that last night was a mistake. Cassian says, I never said that. You didn't need to. I saw it in your eyes, Nesta says. The only mistake I made was that you ran off before I could get on my knees. And Nesta says, won't your friends say that this was a mistake? Cassian says, my friends have nothing to do with this. Nesta says, what of training? Cassian says, this stays out of training. And Nesta says, this stays out of training and everything else. This is just physical. Cassian agrees and climbs into her bed. He gets Nesta off and then he leaves saying, we're even now. So he doesn't actually try to get her pregnant. Cassian spends the whole night into the next morning about thinking what he did with Nesta. Nesta and Azriel arrive at the training ring the next morning, and Cassian says, good morning, Az. Nesta, how did you sleep? And Nesta goes, like a baby. Cassian asks why Az is up there that morning, and he's like, I thought I'd do some training before I head out. I'm not interrupting anything, am I? Cassian says, nope, we're just starting hand-to-hand combat. Cassian, notes the way that, Nesta, looks at Az. He thinks to himself, maybe that is why Az had never said a bad word about Nesta, never seemed inclined to start a fight with her. She saw him and was not afraid of him. There weren't many people who fit the bill. That is the secret, right? That is the secret to a lot of these people who are falling in love, according to Sarah J. Maas, is do they see the whole of you and are they not afraid? Maybe Nesta and Az should get together. Just kidding. I love Cassian. I can't even joke about that. Nesta asks to see the two of them fight so she can see what it should look like for a sparring match to look like. Cassian asks Az to spar before they start. Both boys take their shirts off. They're like, we'll do it full speed and then we'll slow down so you can really see what we're doing. The boys know each other incredibly well, so they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Cassian fakes out Azriel because they're doing the walk around in circles part of the fight. And Cassian wants Azriel to go first. And so he fakes Azriel out by pretending to grin over at Nesta. And then that's when the fight starts. But then at the end, Azriel pretends that Nesta has been hurt. He goes and looks over at Nesta. And Cassian obviously looks to make sure she's okay. And then Azriel punches him square in the jaw. Azriel laughs and they both look at Nesta. And they, now that the battle is, the fighting is over. And they can tell she's trying to play it cool, but she's blushing. And Cassian says, you're drooling. And Nesta says, as if there was anything enticing. If there was anything enticing, it was seeing Azriel punch you in the face. And Cassian says, keep telling yourself that, Ness. That afternoon, in the library, Nesta finds Gwyn singing to herself outside of Meryl's office. And she asks, what do you know about the Dread Trove? And Gwyn's literally never heard of it. And Nesta's still thinking about that shirtless sparring session between Cass and Az, mostly. And Nesta kind of explains the Dread Trove situation to Gwyn, especially the part about the Trove making people kind of forget about it. Gwyn explains that they have a cataloging system, but it only goes down to level 7, so if there's references beyond that, they don't know. The book's down there, not their business. And Nesta says, I know, but you're clearly very good at what you do. If you have any extra time, I'd really appreciate it if you would help me look into it at all. And Gwyn says, let me finish proofing this chapter, and then I'll see what I can discover. Finding objects to help our court protect the world is rather exciting. About as exciting as I'm willing to get these days, but it shall be an adventure. And Nesta says, you could come to training if you want another sort of adventure. And Gwyn's like, that's not for me. I'm sorry. I'm not a warrior. And Nesta says, neither am I, but we could be. And Gwyn says, I don't think so. If I wished to be a warrior, I would have gone that route as a child. Instead, I offered myself as an acolyte, and that is what I am. Nesta says, you don't have to give up one thing to be another. Training is exercise, learning to breathe and stretch and fight. Aren't you researching Valkyries for Meryl? That might even give you further insight. And you and I have, and I already have muscle building up. 2 weeks and I can tell a difference. Is it Cassian's presence that makes you hesitate? Gwyn blushes a bit in shame and fear, even though she knows Cassian is a good man. She's a little freaked out by having a boy around. And Nesta knows not to push. And she says, okay, all right, let me know if you learn anything regarding the Trove. After her work in the library today, Nesta heads straight to the stairs. Nesta begins the steps slower this time, really contemplating each step of her foot, letting each step downward be a thought, a piece of one of Amren's puzzles that she sifted through. Down and down she went, turning over each word and glance from Gwyn during the time Nesta had worked in the library. Step to step, she told herself with each burning, trembling movement of her legs. Step to step to step. Again, she replayed the conversation. Each step was a different word, or motion, or scent. Nesta was on step 2000 when she halted. She knew what she had to do. Next thing we see, Cassian at the library, because Clotho had requested to speak with him. Clotho writes, I have asked Nesta twice now not to practice in the library, and she has disregarded my request. For 5 days, she has blatantly ignored my commands to stop. Cassian is like, she's practicing down here? They've continued to work on hand-to-hand combat, and it's a lot of memorizing a lot of different combinations of punches and kicks and things. Clotho explains that Nesta is practicing all the time, and while her work isn't suffering, it's quite distracting to the other acolytes to see her punching and kicking in the shadows. Cassian asks to go down and speak with her, and Clotho sends him down to level 5 to go get Nesta. He gets down there. Or he says to Clotho, you do know this is Nesta Archeron we're talking about. She does nothing unless she wishes to, and she is the least likely person to listen to me. And Clotho says she's a will of iron, and Cassian goes, of steel. Good seeing you, Clotho. And Clotho says, you as well, Lord Cassian. And Cassian goes, just Cassian. Clotho says, you are a lord in good deeds. It is not a title earned but born. He gets down to level 5, he finds Nesta, and she is practicing her punches, and Cassian says, you are still dropping your elbows. She jumps startled to see him. Nesta says, I'm not dropping my elbows, and Cassian says, I just saw you do it twice with that right hook. And Nesta says, I assume Clotho sent you to reprimand me? Cassian says, I didn't know you were so invested in training that you kept at it down here. Nesta says, I am tired of being weak, of depending on others to defend me. And Cassian says, before I dispense with the lecture about ignoring Clotho's request, let me just say that. Nesta says, show me. Show me where I'm dropping my elbows. Cassian sees the old Nesta for a moment, and so even though Clotho might be annoyed, he walks her through the correction, and then once Nesta is punching correctly again, he tells her, if you did that against an opponent, they'd be on the ground, gasping for air. And Nesta says, and then I'd make the kill. Cassian's like, okay, no more practicing in the library, or she'll send someone that you like less than me to talk to you. Reese will be set down here next, and nobody wants Reese here. And then he asks her to show another combo, and she does it perfectly. And when Cassian turns to leave, he sees a whole group of priestesses watching them over one of the railings. He turns to Nesta and quietly says to her, your right hook was perfect this morning. Yes, but not when I watched you in the stacks. Nesta says, I figured you'd correct me. You can tell Clotho I won't practice in the library anymore. And Cassian goes, crafty, Archeron. Nesta waves over her shoulders. Nesta had known that they needed to see what Cassian was like as a teacher, that he was gentle and that he'd never touched her without asking, and that's what it was going to look like. It wasn't something scary, but something very gentle and thoughtful and safe. But that night, again, the sign-up sheet is blank. Curses. Clotho also seems really disappointed to see that sheet empty. Nesta and her share a glance. Nesta heads straight for the stairs, and she starts walking. Perhaps she was good for nothing, after all. Perhaps she'd been a fool to think that this trick might convince them. Maybe physical training wasn't what they were required to overcome their demons, and she'd been arrogant enough to assume that she knew what they needed. Down and down the stairs Nesta walked, the walls pressing in. She'd only made it to stair 900 before she turned around, her steps as heavy as if they had been weighed with lead blocks. When Nesta returns to her bedroom, the house has left her a book, but it's not a romance. It is called The Dance of Battle. And Nesta says, you can take this one back. I thank you. But the house doesn't take the book back. And Nesta picks up the book, and she realizes it's not from the house. It's from Cassian. It smells like him. He left it for her, deemed her worthy of whatever lay inside. Nesta reads until midnight, even bringing the book to dinner. It was astonishing how much the art of warfare was like the social manipulation her mother had insisted she learn. Picking battlegrounds, finding allies amongst the enemies of one's enemies. Some of it was wholly new, of course, and in such a precise way of thinking that she knew she'd have to read the manuscript many times to fully grasp its lessons. She's thinking about Cassian and how much Cassian has to think, and how much strategizing and planning he has to do, how many things he needs to keep in his mind in order to lead his armies. And she thinks about the priestesses and how they just still aren't signing up. Did it matter if the priestesses didn't show up for training? Beyond her own reluctance to concede to failure, did it matter? It did, somehow. She had failed in every aspect of her life, utterly and spectacularly failed, and keeping others from realizing it had been her main purpose. She had shut them out, had shut herself out, because the weight of all those failures threatened to shatter her into 1,000 pieces. Nesta comes into the library the next day and she doesn't even look at the sign-up sheet or at Clotho. She can't bear the disappointment, but Clotho stops her with a raised hand and points at the pillar with the sign-up sheet. And it was not sorrow leaking from the priestess, but something like buzzing excitement. Something that made Nesta whirl on her heel and stride for the pillar. A name had been scrawled on the sheet. One name, in bold letters, one name, ready for tomorrow's lesson. Gwyn. Okay, and that is the end of part 1 of A Court of Silver Flames. I just love this book so much. I think it is so, hopeful, and charming and lovely. And, I am fascinated by, how it has such, a different tone and vibe than the rest of the series in a way that is, just lovely. I'm just having such a lovely time talking through it. I hope you are, too. I'm excited to continue Nesta and Cassian's story. I hope you are. I hope you'll be along for the ride. If you want to subscribe so you know when the next video is coming out, it's probably a good idea. You don't want to miss it. It gets really good in the next part. I will see you in the next video. I hope you have an amazing day. And for all the Nestas out there, climb your mountain. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.